one luxurious office where a gentleman with white gloves and a red cursive pen sat at a desk, telling the main character in the room that he didn't expect anything from her as a wife, since they had recently gotten married. The Duke in the luxurious robe, who has the name Klaus and is an aristocrat of the Duchy of Bruggen, was too busy with papers and work to quarrel with his wife. So he simply said that he allows her to do something interesting, as long as she does not show herself to others. And when the calm, angry Duke was thinking that the girl in front of him was afraid of him and therefore did not say anything, suddenly he saw in front of him not just his wife, but a white-haired lady clapping her hands with joy, because, according to her, she could do anything. While the Duke couldn't even utter a word from shock, not understanding why the lady in front of him was so cheerful, the heroine with a beautiful appearance smiled and asked the guy again if she really could do nothing. He continued to remain silent and stare at the lady, who was delighted by such news, confessing to him that she had always dreamed of doing nothing and lazing around for days, so she didn't even see any problems with it. Looking closely at the lady, who was rejoicing at everything the Duke was saying, Klaus was surprised, realizing that she was not joking and seemed to be behaving seriously, although earlier he was sure that the girl would be afraid of him. He decided to stop everything he was doing and look at the lady in front of him, asking if he even understood why they got married and what the nature of their relationship was, because they didn't just become husband and wife for no reason. Then the blonde leaned towards him and with even greater joy, sparks in her eyes, said that she understood that they had a fictitious marriage. That is, a marriage not for love, but for profit. And she also said positively that she was a victim chosen by the Louis family and was being used to contain aggression between their peoples. The Duke was even more surprised by this, and so he imagined her in a dark robe, amazed that the lady perfectly understood and accepted her position as a victim, and that she was not considered a duchess in this place, since her reputation was practically at rock bottom. He remembered that this lady had been abandoned by two aristocratic families, and this marriage seemed to be the ultimate insult to her, as she was being brazenly used. But now a sweet lady stood before him, bright and smiling, telling him that she would not bother anyone. The lady smiled sweetly and told the guy that she would be so quiet that no one would even notice her. And Klaus was already sure that the girl smiled even when she had no reputation and was just a tool in someone's hands. At that moment, it was as if lightning had passed through the Duke's head, because he, sitting at his desk, looked at his wife with his mouth slightly open, asking himself in his mind whether this llama was all right, if everything suited her. The thing is, the main character, who has long, white hair, is not only the difficult daughter of Count Louis, but also a disgrace to her family, and also has the name Loanna. But she was unlucky to be born right now, because everyone quickly considered her a symbol of a bad omen. Even though the girl has snow-white and shiny locks of hair that flutter in the wind like silk, she is not loved at all, and is considered someone who can be humiliated and treated accordingly, even if her parents consider her a disgrace. She almost always wore snow-white dresses and looked amazing, like a snow queen, but the attitude towards her did not change at all, because even when she walked down the corridor, everyone around whispered and looked away. Now she is not only the daughter of Count Louis, but also the wife of a duke named Klaus. And while in his house, she sometimes met with maids who asked the lady if she needed to be taken to her chambers, which made her very surprised. And she was surprised for the reason that the lady spent her entire childhood in a dark room, where her mother would sometimes come in, angry and dissatisfied with her, which is why she would yell at the child, pretend that she didn't exist and didn't even visit her daughter. Even in the winter season, of course, when the little girl was 6 years old, she was locked in a dark bedroom, and outside the window it was constantly snowing, because of which the girl was very cold and soon she turned white. But the maids and others did not care. The girl had to lie on the cold floor and cover herself with a blanket, blushing and shaking from frostbite, realizing that no one would help her, because she was left here for no apparent reason, forcing the little girl to feel alone. She cried often and could do nothing about it, because no one even intended to help her. And from the constant silence, loneliness, cold, and darkness, the girl almost went crazy. But this was not destined to happen, because memories of her past life helped her come to her senses. The thing is, the girl is not an ordinary lady, but the one whose soul has moved into Loanna's body, and previously she was a brown-haired lady who lived in a loving family and worked in her own coffee shop, taking orders from people and making aromatic coffee for them. And now, when the lady is a duchess with a beautiful appearance, but a terrible fate, she still smiles, telling herself that in her first life she died tragically in a car accident on the way to the landlord. But in order to remember everything from the very beginning, the lady decided to recall her native house with a red roof, a luxurious castle in which not only she lived, but also her family, who had recently received a fateful letter with a marriage proposal from the southern duchy of Bruggen. That day, the mother and father of the main character had a big fight, and the woman was yelling at her husband, saying that they couldn't give their daughter in marriage and thereby involve her in political affairs. But the Count tried to calmly explain to his woman that they couldn't refuse such an offer from noble aristocrats. After that, the lady's parents started talking about how they couldn't give their precious daughter named Beth in marriage, and so they decided together to give away their unloved daughter named Loanna, the main character, and she overheard it not far from them. And because of this decision of the parents, who sacrificed their own daughter in order to protect another, the protagonist ended up in a luxurious apartment in light blue, and it seems does not regret it much. Now, when the fair-haired lady walks through the mansion and meets the maids in front of her who welcome her into the house, she rejoices, because here perhaps she will be treated at least a little better than in her own home. The blonde with pink eyes smiled, and it was clear that she was filled with delight, because she was sincerely examining the interior and asking everyone if this was really her room, which surprised the two maids near her, who were silent and confused. The maids looked at each other with puzzled faces, wondering why the aristocrat was surprised by her own bedroom. And they also discussed her, saying that her reputation had fallen so much that she had to let things slide and agree to a forced marriage for the sake of some support. The room really turned out to be nice and perfect in almost every corner, because near the window there was a nightstand with a vase and a bouquet of roses. And next to it was a globe, which the lady looked at, telling the maids that they could go and she would handle everything else herself. After which, the maids left the room. Even after the girls left, the lady did not stop looking at her own room with admiration and thinking that not everything was so bad, because she received a luxurious house, constant cover, and a life without obligations. And while the main character was only too happy to play the role of a seemingly quiet mouse, her husband continued to sit at his desk in his office and look at papers in silence, solving every problem in his personal duchy. Also, in his office, at another table, sat the Duke's assistant, Blondlin, who also read texts and carefully examined documents, waiting for the master to give him an assignment. The thing is, Klaus was thinking about the Emperor's family, which is not as simple and good-natured as everyone thinks, because now, when the Duke reads the reports he does not understand, the imperial family allows itself to ask strange questions right after he married Loanna. The black-haired boy clenched the paper into his fist in anger and thought about how he would definitely put these aristocrats in their place when he found the perfect moment to do so. But no matter how hard he thought about work and the affairs of the duchy, he still recalled in his mind the image of sweet Loanna, who smiled at him for the last time and promised that she would be very quiet, would not stick her neck out or cause trouble. Fleetingly, Klaus began to tap his finger on the table and think about the girl, calling her a real hermit, whom no one loves and whom everyone only uses. The thing is, the man also remembered how Loanna would end up near the maids and tell them about something, realizing that the heroine, being a duchess and mistress, had never learned to give orders to the maids, which is why she could not show herself as the main one. In addition, Klaus recently learned that Loanna also does not know how to take an interest in the affairs of the family business, because one day she appeared in front of Klaus's assistant and simply said that from now on she will manage the budget of the house, which sounded funny. Imagining a nice lady behind blue pillows, the guy realized that according to the latest reports, his wife was idle and doing absolutely nothing for the family. And she reassured him, because the heroine, on the contrary, should not show herself. But now the Duke remembered that he had not received any reports regarding Loanna for a long time. That's why he decided to turn to his white-haired assistant, telling him that he needed today's report, which made the guy look at him with bewilderment and even ask what he meant by sir. Only when the black-haired guy clarified that he needed a report on the very woman who had recently become his wife, the assistant came to his senses and shouted to the aristocrat that he would now provide him with all the necessary papers. After that, having found the necessary document on his own desk, the guy handed it to the aristocrat, showing that on the snow-white sheet there were a couple of sentences and lines talking about Loanna and her activities in the house. Taking the necessary thing in his hands, the red-eyed guy began to read the report, expecting that he would not learn anything new, but what he read made him surprised and think for a moment. Still holding the paper in his hands, the man asked the servant if his wife had really met with the mage, as written in the report, which is why the blonde man in front of him confidently said that everything was so. and Loanna had recently visited the Tower of the Mage Geralt, that is, 5 days ago. Upon hearing this news, the Duke immediately became wary and angry, looking at the paper and asking his assistant why his wife suddenly needed a wizard who was as useless as Gerald. But a few days earlier, when the Duke and everyone else had no idea what was going to happen, the main character was walking through the garden and suddenly, wearing a green dress, stopped in front of a certain bush with berries that struck her. For her, it was not an ordinary bush, but a real coffee tree, which is why the lady, who in the past was the main lover of coffee, covered her face with her hands in delight, not believing that in this world she sees a coffee tree with red berries. However, remembering in time that in this world she had never seen a person who drank coffee, she decided to call a maid named Isa, who immediately looked at the lady and hurried to approach her, dropping all her work in the garden. The heroine immediately asked the maid Isa what this plant was called, which made the girl look at the red berries thoughtfully, telling the lady that they called it the Adanthus tree. But it sounded strange. The blonde with big, curious eyes looked at the Adanth tree and asked Isa if this tree only grows in the south, which is why the lady answered that, as far as she knows, it is so. The maid said that a long time ago in this house there lived a beautiful duchess with blonde hair, who loved gardening, and it was only thanks to her that this tree appeared here, as well as many other plants in the area. And when the blonde thought about it a little and decided to ask the maid Isa if she had ever tried the fruits of the Adanth tree, that is, its red berries, the heroine was surprised, because the girl said that although the flowers of this tree are beautiful, the fruits are of no interest to anyone at all. While examining the berries of the Adanth tree, the heroine asked the maid why no one eats these berries, and the maid replied that it was all because of a certain legend, which made people not even touch these fruits. And the maid Isa began her story with the fact that 1,000 years ago in clear times, when elves lived with people together on the same land, which even in appearance was magical and saturated with a variety of colors, everything was fine. The maid told that the world ended exactly at the moment when people started eating the fruits of the Adanth tree and thereby going crazy, killing everyone. And because of this, Loanna said that it was more like a fairy tale. But Isa only laughed, saying that no one wanted to take the risk and try the berries anyway. Isa also told that the fruits of the Adanth tree are bitter and tasteless, and that is why no one ever touched them, which upset the protagonist, who looked at the maid with sadness, realizing that people in this world never learned about another property of these berries. Then the girl thought and imagined a scene of farmers resisting potatoes, realizing that in this world people hated the berries of the Adanth tree just as people in her world previously hated potatoes and considered them cursed. The blonde decided to look at the Night Ogre and finally ask her about whether she had ever tried the seeds of this tree, not expecting that the girl would not like this question very much. Isa shouted that she didn't even know the person who would dare to try the seeds of this tree, which made the lady smile and frown at the same time, realizing that no one cared about this plant. But Izu was very surprised that even the terrible legend did not stop the heroine, because she fearlessly picked some berries from the tree and said that she had already found a use for them, and therefore wanted to pick the berries, while the maid agreed with her, but still did not understand what the mistress meant. Therefore, after some time, Loanna already had a small amount of red berries from the Adanth tree, which she collected for herself and brought home, realizing that they would make delicious coffee beans. Having put the berries on the table, the girl cheerfully raised her hands up and said to herself with a smile that she had managed to get coffee beans, even though they were not yet dried and looked like berries, not coffee. Immediately after this, the girl stopped rejoicing, dropped her hands, and bent over tiredly, realizing that now she only had fresh fruits, which she needed to work hard with, because they turned into coffee beans. The lady realized that she would not be able to brew even a cup of coffee from such a small amount of beans, because first she would need to get rid of the red pulp of the berry, leaving only the green beans, and then prepare them for processing. And after the seeds are cleaned of pulp and gluten, they will need to be dried, due to which they will acquire the necessary brown color, and then they should be mixed well and ground into powder. Remembering all this and realizing that she would have to do all this on her own because no one in this world even suspects the existence of coffee, the coffee maker could not resist, and with a sigh fell on the Lebanon, not even intending to continue the business. Out of desperation, she clutched the pillow and began to think hard about the whole situation, realizing that she couldn't do it all on her own, but she still wanted to try at least one cup of coffee. The strange and sad behavior of the main character was noticed by Isa, who all this time carefully watched how the lady was sad and was not going to do anything. She understood that the lady was sad and something needed to be done about it. The brown-haired lady with brown eyes did not understand why the lady was sad. However, looking at Loanna's condition, she understood that the lady looked disappointed with something, and therefore the lady decided to make her some mulled wine in the evening to lift her spirits. As expected, even when it got dark outside and the stars were visible in the blue sky, the lady's mood did not improve. And in the castle, where lights were shining from every window, the maid decided to prepare her the same hot drink with alcohol and fruit that she had been thinking about earlier. Isa was pushing the cart along the slightly dark corridor, where there was no one, and the lady's steps echoed throughout the room. And the maid herself was thinking about Loanna's condition, because she noticed that she had not touched the food even for such a long time, and obviously she was upset about something. And while the maid was already gathering motivation to bring the mistress some mulled wine and thereby lift her spirits, the protagonist lay on the bed and thoughtfully thought about whether she needed to first dry the seeds herself and then fry them in a frying pan. After that, she decided to get up, saying to herself, "Oh, this is a bad idea." And it seems she has gone crazy because in this case, she will not get coffee, but something remotely similar to such a drink. She immediately recalled in her head that very cup of aromatic coffee from her past life, which she now incredibly wants. But she does not even have the right seeds and equipment to prepare her favorite drink. Remembering about the equipment, the girl immediately imagined the grinding machine she needed, which had always helped her in her past life. But now she only had to think about it. But the lady realized that she was not ready to give up so easily. Looking at the red berries that were still lying on the table, the girl became even sadder, saying that the coffee fruits were right in front of her now. But she couldn't even drink a sip of coffee, which made her incredibly sad. Out of desperation, the lady got out of bed and pressed herself against the wall, raising her legs towards herself and bending over as if she was about to close herself off and would no longer even think about coffee. Although it was precisely with this drink that all the most wonderful moments in her past life were associated. But when a brilliant idea was born in her head, she suddenly jumped up from her seat and clenched one hand into a fist, enthusiastically telling herself, "Oh, in this world, although there are no mechanisms for making coffee, there is magic and sorcery." She immediately imagined in her head a wizard with a magical book in his hands, realizing that in this world they not only exist, but are also considered almost engineers, alchemists. Having imagined in her head the most diverse devices that wizards create, she realized that they could help her create something that looked like a coffee machine, or at least a grinder for beans. Loanna knows that wizards are not just those who like to play around with magic, but those who constantly study spells and read a wide variety of books and papers in order to become a true professional in their field. But their work is not limited to magical creations, because sorcerers often shake hands with aristocrats from royal families, and thus agree with them on cooperation, which is beneficial for both parties, because kings and queens gain a reputation by helping ambitious wizards, and the magicians in turn receive funds for their work. Realizing that she could use the same scheme in her case, the girl immediately hurried to the table, asking herself how to persuade at least one magician to cooperate with her. Taking one berry in her hands and pressing it a little, because of which the pulp from the seed itself began to slide off, the girl thought about the fact that if at least one magician understood her thoughts and tried the coffee, they would definitely help her. And after that, the girl with big pink eyes smiled slyly, realizing that she had already come up with a way to make the magician cooperate with her, and where she could find this same wizard. That's how the evening ended for the main character, after which she decided to sleep and in a few days meet a clear morning, blue sky and day. Skin she already wanted to act, and thus leave the beautiful palace to search for the magician. In her hands, she already held a cute little basket with dried coffee beans, which she had obtained thanks to the fact that the lady had previously removed the pulp and dried them, after which she carried the product in the basket straight to the magician. The girl looked at the grains with enthusiasm and a smile, realizing that she had already come to the magician and he should be in his tower. And since sorcerers never interfere in politics, her visit would definitely not cause him any problems, and the heroine would be able to remain in the shadows while achieving her goal. And while the main character was thinking about how to persuade the sorcerer to try coffee beans, which would taste bitter but would definitely give strength, she was already approaching a cute and snow-white tower with a red roof, in which the person she needed lived. With each step, she slowly approached the door of the magician's house, suspiciously examining the mechanisms and structures around the house that were spinning, making constant knocks, clicks, but for the heroine it looked strange. The girl continued walking, wearing a black, beautiful dress, thinking about how she needed to be more careful so as not to crash into anything. And after a few minutes, the lady actually managed to walk past all the mechanisms. She stopped in front of the red high door, looking at it and already expecting that a real wizard would come out of it at any moment. But for now, she was alone and could only hear strange sounds from the house. And as soon as she knocked on the door at least twice, loud knocks and the indignant voice of one guy were heard in the house, who was already heading towards the front door, while the lady looked at her in shock. A second later, the main character was opened by a long-haired wizard with a handsome appearance and a thin body, who looked at the lady with black, puzzled eyes, asking her how he could help her, also scratching his head, while Loanna greeted him sweetly. After this, there was an awkward silence, because the wizard did not even understand who he was dealing with and who the lady in front of him was, which is why he scratched his neck and asked the lady who he was talking to now. This made the heroine cheer up and smile, because according to the guy's words, he is not at all interested in the events of the duchy in which he lives, and she also hastened to tell the sorcerer her first and last name. The red-haired wizard folded his arms as the blonde in the black dress politely told him that she had married a duke a month ago, and only after that did the guy say he understood that she was a duchess from the north. Noticing the strange, angry voice of the guy, the girl began to look at him with slight surprise, realizing that it seemed he was not happy to meet her. But she still did not understand why their communication was so cold, and the lady was even more surprised that while she was thinking, the wizard quickly said that he could not help her, and therefore said goodbye. At that moment, the girl realized that she seemed like a little person in front of the wizard who could do nothing, when the sorcerer looked at her with folded hands with anger and explained that he was only a guest at the Bruggen estate and that he was not going to get involved in family disagreements. The slightly embarrassed main character looked at the guy with a smile and said that she wasn't going to solve her own family issues with him, since she came to him with a proposal to start a business. The wizard asked the girl what she wanted to offer him in that case, and then the lady looked at him with a sly smile and raised her own basket of coffee beans, saying that it was all about this thing. The curious guy immediately extended his hand with the dried seeds in the basket and began to touch them with his finger, saying, "Lady, these are seeds of the Adanth tree." But he still does not understand why the llama is showing him such seemingly simple things. Taking advantage of the situation, the main character with the same sly smile asked the wizard if he hadn't heard about the mysterious secret of these fruits before, which immediately made the wizard ask Loanna what she was talking about. The girl made the guy imagine dried seeds of the Adanth tree in his mind, because her mystical story began with the fact that when people first tried these seeds, they seemed to go crazy. But they also have benefits. The wizard, taking some seeds in his hand, began to examine them and asked the lady what the benefits of these fruits were. But when the girl in front of him suddenly began to talk about drowsiness, especially during work, the long-haired guy said that he still did not understand how fatigue was connected with seeds. Loanna looked at the guy with a smile and took one seed in her hand, telling the sorcerer that for now it would be difficult to explain to her the connection between these things, but she guaranteed that if he tried at least one seed, he would immediately have the strength to work. To be more convincing, the lady decided to try a dried coffee bean herself first, which turned out to be incredibly bitter and tasteless. But Eldie still chewed the seed and swallowed it, even when saliva flowed from her mouth. The long-haired guy began to stare intently at the coffee seeds, while the heroine in front of him chewed coffee with a smile and showed with her whole appearance that she liked everything, although this was not so. The ordinary silent magician believed her. But a minute later, the wizard decided to throw a handful of seeds into his mouth and taste them, not suspecting that this would possibly be the most bitter and tasteless thing he had ever eaten in his entire life. Soon he felt the whole wonderful and bitter taste of coffee. And then, without even intending to chew them and trying to tell the lady, "This is incredibly disgusting," because his face even turned blue. But the heroine already knew that the wizard would not like the coffee the first time. That's why she immediately hurried to cover the long-haired guy's mouth with her palms, and thus force him to chew the beans further, which is why the sorcerer turned away and resisted. But the heroine still told him to swallow the coffee, saying that everything was fine and that's how it should be. Only after the wizard, Harold, had swallowed the coffee beans completely and started coughing, wiping his lips with discontent and asking the lady what all this was about, the protagonist calmly told him that now he should go about his business and visit her in the evening. At parting, the lady even said with a smile that she was sure that the sorcerer would come to her himself after this, because something incredible would happen. And after they parted, the girl was again in a spacious room and was sitting on the sofa waiting for her friend. As soon as she heard knocks on the door and footsteps behind the door, she immediately looked towards the passage with delight and joy. realizing that the sorcerer had come to her that same evening when she made him try the coffee beans. What made her even more happy and surprised was that Harold didn't just walk in, but opened the doors with all his might and immediately shouted to Loanna, asking what she had done to him that day, since something truly amazing had happened to his body. In response, the blonde only sat down more comfortably on the sofa and smiled, asking the sorcerer in response, hadn't she warned him before about a certain effect from coffee beans? And had she also inquired about his well-being when the long-haired man was about to sit down in front of her on the livan? Hearing these words, invigorated and determined to tell the story, the guy clenched his fist and indignantly told the heroine that something magical had happened to him that very evening, because his mind was clear and his body was relaxed only from eating these seeds. He told the Protozoites with delight and shock that today, thanks to the energy from the grains, he was able to solve the equation that he had been working on for a whole month, and he was still full of energy to continue working even at the end of the day. Then the main character smiled at the guy and thought about how it was very similar to the coffee overdose that happened to the sorcerer after eating a whole handful of coffee. But she told him that these were the enchanting powers of the Adanth tree, because its fruits are capable of giving energy and improved concentration. And when Gerald asked the lady with doubts whether it was legal to use it at all, Loanna happily clapped her hands and said that everything was legal. And also, if you make a special recipe, you can get coffee. When the lady told the wizard that such a drink would not only provide benefits in the form of strength and energy, but also a pleasant taste, and not bitter and unpleasant, Geralt was also happy, asking the lady what to do for this. The wizard became even more interested when the aristocrat explained in Lebanon that she would need his help to prepare such a drink, since she would need sophisticated devices and mechanisms. Hearing this, the guy folded his arms and looked at the girl with understanding, saying that now he understood why the lady came to him, because she wanted to use him to prepare some kind of thing. But Loanna responded that everything was wrong and this was just cooperation. After that, the sweet and smiling Loanna, sitting quietly on the sofa, asked the wizard if he would help her. But then the long-haired Charlie sat down on the furniture opposite and asked the lady to first tell in more detail about the coffee and the mechanisms for it. And after some time, the heroine, full of motivation and determination to act, told the wizard everything that needed to be done to prepare a drink called coffee. But when she stood in front of him and asked if everything was clear, the wizard replied that he understood the essence of the process, but considered all this unreasonable. He thoughtfully touched his chin with his hand and honestly told the lady that everything sounded strange to him, because he didn't understand why so much work was needed just to improve the taste of this drink. Then the main character fell silent, only smiling at the guy in response, because she knows in words all the preparation of coffee sounds strange, but if you do everything, you will get a truly tasty and healthy drink. She decided to just put her hand on her cleavage and looked at the guy with a smile, asking if he could just trust her, so she wouldn't have to explain all the processes again, but just do everything and see the result. Because of this, the guy was even more surprised and thoughtful, with a shock on his face asking the lady how he could even trust a person he had only known for one day, which made the protagonist realize that the person in front of her was a much more reasonable person than she had previously thought, and it was difficult to convince him. She decided to tell the guy the most important thing, imagining in her mind the ready drink and the enchanting stone, explaining to the guy that with the help of its mechanisms and magic, unusual fruits of the tree would be obtained, having the effect of more productive work. Gerald thought even harder, still sitting on the couch and saying ice. About all this sounded tempting, and because of this, the protagonist smiled and asked the sorcerer in this case to create the device she was talking about, because with the necessary skills, it would be easy for him. Then Gerald grabbed his head and with his eyes closed told the lady that he hoped the drink would be tasty and that creating the mechanisms wouldn't take too much time. The lady was even more pleased that in the end the wizard agreed to cooperate with her and said goodbye with the words that they would see each other next week. And then the protagonist's cheeks turned red and her eyes became even happier. Duke Klaus read from the report with a thoughtful expression, realizing that for some reason a wizard was needed about his wife, but his assistant was unable to find out more in-depth details. He looked seriously at the servant with golden hair and said that Nicola's wizards do not interfere in the affairs of the duchy, and therefore he asks the assistant about Geralt's wife. And to this, the guy replied that he just wanted to say something on this topic. The assistant honestly told them that they had noticed that the Duchess had come to the wizard's house a few days earlier and had a short chat with him, but they had failed to notice anything suspicious, and the aristocrat reacted to this with anger. not understanding how his intelligence, whose job it was to spy on his wife, had failed to find out the smallest details. Then the Duke himself hastened to get up from the desk and straighten his tie with his hand, not understanding what exactly his wife had in mind. And even when the assistant said that they could also ask the wizard about everything, Klaus replied that there was no need to do that. Klaus explained that he would personally talk to his wife and would be back soon, so he was already in a hurry to throw a luxurious coat over his shoulders and begin searching for Loanna throughout the palace, also confessing to his assistant that he still wanted to take a walk. And while Klaus was already looking for the main character, she was in the garden near the palace and, wearing a snow-white robe, was picking coffee beans in an upbeat mood. Because she already knew that 5 days had passed since the meeting with the wizard and very soon she would be able to try coffee. Isa was also looking at her, and she seemed to be worried and sad because of the aristocrat, and therefore asked the lady if he was tired of constantly picking berries from the Adanth tree. But in response, the lady laughed, saying that everything was fine. The girl looked at the red berries in the basket and realized that it was already filled with them. So now she asked the maid Isa to bring a new basket and put this one, filled with berries, on the table. To this, the maid responded with a smile and took the basket in her hands, telling the lady that she would do it right away, because the heroine did not plan to stop, but decided to work with such diligence that she would collect all the coffee berries in the garden. But she never managed to do what she had planned, because what she saw before her made her not only fall into fear and be stunned, but also threw the basket of berries on the floor in panic, because what she saw made her scream with her mouth open. The protagonist did not attach any importance to this and therefore did not even tear herself away from her work, looking at something and asking the maid what was going on with her, not even noticing that right behind her a tall man in a dark coat appeared, who appeared silently and unexpectedly. Only when the maid shouted to her mistress that the Duke of Bruggen was standing behind her, the blonde raised her head with curiosity and noticed a red-eyed brunette next to her who was looking only at her. Realizing that the highest-ranking person in this house and in the duchy was standing behind her, the lady looked at the man with real fear and anxiety, because of which it seemed that her whole body turned white and her soul left her heart, although her shoulders were shaking with panic. She immediately forgot about what she wanted to do earlier, and her mood seemed to evaporate, which is why she turned and looked down with a thoughtful face, wondering what the Duke wanted from her, but still bowed and greeted the aristocrat. The Duke did not greet the lady in return, but only glanced at the red berries that the lady was picking, and he asked if she was really picking them, to which the lady replied that it was true. And the girl really got scared at that moment when the guy started approaching her and asking why she needed a wizard and what she was planning, wondering why his simple appearance made the lady wary and shake. The strange behavior of the main character, or rather the fact that the girl's body and especially her fragile shoulders were shaking from nervousness, was perfectly noticed by Klaus. And therefore he guessed that his wife had definitely thought about it if she got nervous, but everything turned out a little differently than he had assumed. When the girl in front of him was silent and afraid to say a word first, Klaus spoke first, saying with displeasure that earlier, when she promised him that she would be quiet and calm, she most likely meant that she would create intrigues and strange things together with the wizard. They were both standing in a luxurious garden under a canopy where there were a variety of trees and bushes, when Klaus continued to talk to the lady, saying that she should confess something as soon as possible, because secrets are never hidden from him. And while Klaus laughed and waited for an answer, the main character clutched the train of her dress and nervously thought about whether she should confess everything so as not to arouse suspicion. But she knows that if she tells about the drink from the Adanth tree, he will take her for a madwoman. The Duke was very surprised that the girl first admitted that she already knew, but he would not believe her words, and therefore he could continue to suspect her of intrigue. But she would also send him an invitation to her chambers, which took the aristocrat by surprise. The Duke immediately imagined in his head a letter with a red wax seal, which made the guy not only interested but also anxious, because he still had no idea what would happen in the bedroom and what the lady would tell him. He looked at the lady with a shocked face and big eyes and asked again about the letter, like, is it really so? To which the lady calmly answered, "Oh, it is true." And she gradually moved away from him. What surprised the gentleman even more was that the lady with pink eyes looked at him with a smile and said that after the invitation, he would definitely find out why she had contacted a wizard named Gerald and why she was collecting the fruits of the Adanth tree. The Duke suddenly realized that he could not be strict with his own wife, which made him quickly become softer. But he also turned away from the lady and walked away, saying that he hoped that the reason for the invitation would be weighty. But at this time, the heroine breathed a sigh of relief. And after the wind suddenly became stronger and the lady had to grab her dress with her hands, but it would not rise. The Duke left finally, thinking about how his wife certainly did not expect his visit. Only when the Duke left, the lady appeared completely dissatisfied. This was evident from her serious face because she wondered why the Duke had suddenly come to her, if earlier she had been sure that he did not care about her. The girl, also looking tired and barely standing on her feet, was thinking about whether she should just lock herself in her own room in order to please her husband, while her mistress looked at her anxiously and asked her how she was feeling. The aristocrat only ordered the maid to go, and after that moment, several days had already passed. Although the Snow-White Palace with beautiful columns and terraces were still surrounded by green foliage, and the heroine was already waiting for the arrival of the sorcerer. This is exactly what the blonde expected. So when she heard a person coming to the terrace, she cheerfully turned her head in that direction. And Issa at that time tried to make out the guest and recognize in him that very wizard who must have already come to them with his mechanisms. And so it turned out, because the long-haired guy appeared, although with a serious face, but with a large bag, which made the Duchess even happier, speaking to them as if it was him she had been waiting for all these days, although this was true. But the wizard was full of seriousness to present his new invention to the aristocrat. So first of all, he walked along the terrace and noticed a basket with a large number of dried fruits on the table, which surprised him. But she answered that she had to work hard for a good result. But still, the main thing for which the wizard came to the aristocrat was in Harold's leather suitcase, which he had already placed on the table and was about to open, presenting his inventions to the girl. And as soon as the guy opened his suitcase and showed its contents, the girl immediately noticed several beautiful and new devices for brewing and grinding coffee, which were shining and completely ready for work. The guy paid special attention to a certain container with a mechanism inside, and the guy told about it, saying that this is a certain pan for uniform and adjustable heating. But Eddie was even more happy, saying that this is a machine for beans and is intended for different roasting of coffee, because each roasting reveals the taste of coffee in a different way. The joyful girl clapped her hands and looked at the mechanisms with inspired eyes, realizing that the size of the roasting machine was ideal for home use. So she certainly wasn't going to supply the entire duchy with coffee. But for now, she liked these things so much she looked at them with a blush on her cheeks. And while the main character couldn't get enough of the new news, the wizard decided to tell the lady about the main buttons on the device, or rather, about two of them, explaining that one of them is designed to control the temperature, and the other is for switching on. And the heroine can also regulate the heating with a few clicks. After that, the curious and serious-minded guy asked the girl what they needed to do now, and the heroine smiled, telling him that they needed to fry the grains in the pan that he had created. And after that, the heroine, determined to recreate an incredible drink with a unique taste, took a handful of beans and threw them straight into the roasting pan, thinking about how much she needed to roast the fruit and what roast to choose. Thinking that she shouldn't take any chances, as coffee in this world might be different and she should choose full roast, she decided to press the power button and the machine started working, intending to roast all the beans until done. The spit inside the pot began to slowly rotate and mix the coffee beans evenly, causing the wonderful aroma of roasted coffee to spread more and more. The first to react to the aroma was the maid Issa, who smiled and began to enjoy the smell, saying that it was very similar to the smell of fresh toasted bread or freshly mown hay. Issa admitted that she really liked the smell of the beans and continued to talk about it further, while a girl was sitting next to her, smiling and thinking about how the smell of roasted coffee beans is really subtle and enchanting. And while the machine was working and everyone was sold, standing next to the machine, the main character looked at the roasted beans and sometimes pressed buttons, thinking that everything should go well, and therefore she was ready to try, to put all her strength into the coffee. And after some time, when the coffee beans became dark and even stronger than before, the wizard asked the lady if it was necessary to grind all the beans now. But the lady said that for now, it was necessary to let the beans lie for at least 3 days, which outraged and upset everyone. The girl, who is a professional in making coffee, knew that the beans must be neutralized from toxic elements in the beans before grinding. But now she smiled at everyone and decided to just say that in 3 days they will be able to use the beans. After this, the wizard left the palace with anticipation of the moment when, in 3 days, he would come to the palace again and see the preparation of the treasured drink. And the blonde, meanwhile, was already turning to the maid with a smile and asking Issa if she could convey a message to the Duke from her. Issa immediately turned to the heroine and said that of course she could do it, also being interested in what exactly was happening between the couple. And when the lady was already handing the necessary envelope with a letter and a red seal to the maid, Isa asked the lady whether the Duke would visit her in 3 days. The girl with pink eyes and white, beautiful hair looked at the girl with deep concentration and answered, like, everything is so. But she is not sure. About the Duke will come to her. Because in fact, the heroine thinks, about with the help of the invitation, she will be able to correct her reputation. But she also doubts about the Duke will come at all. Out of sadness, the girl decided to get up and go to the window, which opened up a view of the treetops, the endless sky, and other buildings near the palace, thinking about how her husband ruled the entire duchy. And she was just using the role of a wife. Sadness and hopelessness appeared on the face of the main character, although she continued to look out the window. But she thought about the fact that even if she invites him to her place in 3 days, she thinks that the Duke will send her his deputy. But he himself will not come because of business and work, because he does not care about her. But everything turned out to be completely wrong, because even the next day, when the blue sky with clouds was again above the luxurious, large palace with a red roof, the Duke in the house again wondered why the wizard came to his wife. This is what the guy with red eyes, sitting at his desk, was interested in the Duke when the deputy was in front of him, and explained that the wizard Gerald had entered the building, and therefore it was unknown what happened next. They could not find out about it. A blonde man with an unusual hairstyle stood in front of the Duke and told, remembering a guard named Brooke, about one of the guards who was next to the room where the wife and the wizard were, and according to him, an unusual aroma began to come from it. Hearing this, the black-haired guy became even more indignant and angry, asking the deputy with anger whether he thought they were brewing potions and some poisons in that room. But the blonde man told with complete confidence that most likely these were sleeping pills and sedatives, since noble ladies constantly use them and order them. But the Duke only tapped his fingers on the table, already knowing that for some reason his wife was collecting the fruits of the Adanth tree. The guy leaned back in his chair and decided to close the door, thinking about whether he should interfere at all. If earlier his wife had been calm and even joyful, collecting fruits. But the guy also imagined the lady in a wedding dress and completely in the dark, mysteriously thinking about how strange the protagonist's calmness is, her suddenly docile nature, and the very fact that everything is fine. And then the guy decided to admit with a smile that he had previously told her to do everything he wants, and he still hasn't visited her. So he knows little about his own wife. After much thought, the brunette sighed and told the deputy that his daughter was ordered to come here once a week. And the blonde also said that he would send a guard named Brooke to her if the lady asked the Duke to come to him. But suddenly the young man answered the old woman that he was planning to visit his wife in a few days, which surprised the deputy incredibly, and at first he did not know about it, asking the gentleman if this was true with his eyes wide with shock. The deputy hastened to remind his master that in 3 days he had an important meeting scheduled regarding the work. But the angry guy just looked sternly ahead and replied that his colleagues could wait for him, because he would go to Loanna first. Only after this did the blonde become calm, looking at the aristocrat with understanding and thinking about the fact that if the Duke personally wanted to meet the lady, then he was really excited, even deciding to put off work. But while the blonde was talking to the gentleman in his office, Isa suddenly appeared in the room with some excitement, because she stood in the middle of the room and loudly greeted Klaus, as if she was going to say something unimportant. As it turned out, the heroine really did bring the guy a letter, and when the aristocrat opened it, he read only a few lines about how Lady Loanna really was inviting him to her chambers in 3 days, but not in a week, as Klaus had previously assumed. But the maid Isa became even more worried at that moment when Klaus became interested in her, asking directly whether she was his wife's personal maid, since he had never seen her before. And when he heard a positive answer from her, he realized that he had forgotten to deal with the recruitment of personnel. He looked thoughtfully at the letter and remembered that after his mother's death, he sometimes supervised the household, but he still needed to review the maids and select the best ones, because Isa looked inexperienced and intimidated. After that, the black-haired guy folded his arms and looked at the maid, asking her if his wife had a few more maids, which surprised the lady even more, and out of anxiety, she could not answer right away. She immediately felt not only awkward but also sad, causing her to look down and wonder why the Duke was asking her about this, since if she had already caused trouble for the aristocrats, she was very sorry and did not want this. Told after Klaus ordered the girl to answer immediately, the maid said that she was the only servant for the lady, still worried about the presence of the evil master next to her. And as soon as she said these words, the previously angry aristocrat became even more dissatisfied and strict, with an angry face asking the lady if this was really so. But the very fact that his wife had only one maid made him very angry. And the lady began to grow even more, even when the master ordered her to go. The blonde tried to ask the master if he needed to resolve the issue with Loanna's maids, but when the Duke replied that there was no need to do so, the deputy thought with a serious face that Klaus did not want to fall under the influence of some woman. But while the guys were talking about the main character and the servants, the protagonist herself was already asking Isa all the details about how her meeting with the master went and whether she had handed over the letter. And the blonde was also asking the girl whether the man had accepted her invitation and said anything at all. Isa sheepishly told the girl that Klaus had refused to come and therefore, perhaps, would come in person. But the lady also spoke as if she was not finishing something, because she was thinking about whether she should tell what had actually happened. When the maid finally decided to tell that the Duke was also interested in whether she was her only maid, the main character looked at Isa in surprise, asking why her husband suddenly became interested in this. Isa also decided to tell the lady with fear and trembling in her body, but the Duke was very unhappy about this. And out of fear, she imagined the face of the strict Duke above her, who could get angry even from one word. Hearing this, the lady fell thoughtfully onto the floor and told Isa that everything was clear to her, although in fact this was far from true, and the words of the Garincha made her ask countless questions. Loanna also thanked Isa for her care and work for her, trying to calm her down and not worry anymore, and the maid was pleasantly surprised by this, a little embarrassed by the words of gratitude. And so the day passed, when the maid brought the Duke a letter and told Loanna about everything that had happened. And the next morning, the main character, smiling, lifted the white cloth with her hand, which for days had covered the roasted coffee beans and protected them because they were already ready to be ground. As soon as the girl smelled the light aroma of roasted peanuts, which clearly indicated that the coffee beans were ready and completely free of carbon dioxide, the lady decided to turn to Isa with a smile. But as soon as she turned around and looked at the completely empty room, the lady remembered that she had previously sent her maid for Sir Gerald, the wizard, who was also supposed to come to her to make coffee. This did not stop the main character, who had previously thought about making the first cup of coffee in this world with others, so she resolutely put her hands on her hips and said to herself, "This is even better, because no one will bother her." That's why the lady went to one of the nightstands near the window, where warm, sunny rays fell and illuminated all the coffee-making equipment, including the grinding and roasting machine. But as soon as she heard several knocks on the door behind her, indicating that the maid had arrived with the sorcerer, the girl looked in the right direction with an encouraged mood and ordered them to come in as quickly as possible. The first to enter the room was the long-haired Gerald, who was eager to see the preparation of the magic drink as soon as possible, and therefore immediately asked the protagonist if they would be making a coffee drink today, while Isa stood smiling and standing behind him. The blonde was also glad that the long-awaited guest had appeared, so she smiled at him and replied that everything was fine and that they would succeed today. But for now, she suggested that they wait a couple of minutes, because she knew that Duke Klaus would also be coming to see them. Everything turned out not to be so fast and soon, because even after a few minutes, when the Duke still did not come, and the three characters were in silence, sitting on the sofa and calmly waiting for the aristocrat, while Isa stood next to them and also waited for the long-awaited appearance of the gentleman. And even after 10 minutes, when the blonde began to doubt that her husband would even appear in the room, the lady with pink eyes wondered if the aristocrat would come, because she knew for sure that he had a lot of work. But he also promised that he would come. The only good thought and hope for the heroine was that the Duke would come to her thanks to at least an official invitation in the form of a letter, which made the lady smile with anxiety, realizing that in fact the Duke had countless things to do. The silence and the endless waiting also confused the wizard Gerald, who looked at the heroine and asked her if they would start making coffee. And after that, the lady with slight sadness suggested that everyone should get down to business. After the heroine asked Isa to bring hot water, cups, and a kettle, and the maid obediently left the room, the lady had already prepared the necessary devices, more precisely, a coffee grinder and a dripper. More precisely, a filter through which ground coffee is poured with water, cleaned, allowing people to drink only purified coffee. Seeing the many devices and how much was needed to prepare everything, the wizard and Isa became even more interested in what was happening, and Gerald began to enthusiastically tell the girl all the processes, as if bragging about his knowledge of this. And after the heroine began to slowly grind whole coffee beans, Isa and the wizard were even more charmed by the smell of the fruit, because according to the maid, now the smell of the beans is very pleasant, sweet, and a little nutty, which is why Loanna said with a smile that it was precisely because they let the beans stand for a couple of days. And the ground coffee, which was very similar to brown powder, after salting went into the filter, which would need to be filled with water and wait for the moment when the finished coffee would flow into the teapot. And the main character, smiling, held another teapot with hot water in her hands, thinking about how dark roast brews better, and the temperature, which is slightly lower than the boiling point, allows the taste of coffee to be revealed even better. And she is glad that Issa prepared all the equipment in advance. Everyone watched with shock and great curiosity, admiration and wonder as the hot water, emitting steam, completely covered the ground coffee before turning into the finished drink. Small bubbles began to appear on the surface of the water, indicating that the ground coffee was already soaking in water and in a few minutes would turn from powder into hot coffee. And the lady also asked Izu to bring even more hot water. And a few minutes later, when the coffee was completely ready and the lady decided to pour the coffee into beautiful cups, the heroine solemnly told everyone that the long-awaited enchanting drink was ready, and she invited everyone to take the first sip. The smiling main character calmly took a cup of coffee in her hand and began to enjoy its taste, while the wizard sitting next to her also wanted to quickly get acquainted with the amazing liquid, and he slowly brought the cup to his lips, tried coffee for the first time. And while the maid and the sorcerer were getting acquainted with coffee for the first time, the blonde was already smiling and drinking her favorite drink and thinking about how this was exactly what she had wanted to try all these days. The lady was even ready to die for this taste. The protagonist continued drinking coffee when the wizard with long hair looked at the cup with admiration and joy, confessing to everyone with pink cheeks that it was much better than gnawing fresh, bitter fruits, and also incredible that other ingredients could be added to coffee. All three were sitting at the coffee table on the sofas, and the heroine was also addressing her own maid, telling her to also try the coffee because all this time Issa could not decide to take the first sip, but only looked at everyone curiously and held her tea set in her hands. On the orders of the Lord, Issa did it, and immediately after the first sip, a pleasant smile appeared on her face, and her cheeks also became pink, because she was in a hurry to admit to everyone that coffee is a real delicacy. The girl imagined in her head not only a variety of nuts, but also vanilla, confessing to everyone that the taste of coffee was not as bitter as she had previously thought, because, in fact, it does not reveal vanilla and nutty notes. Issa happily told everyone that she had never tried anything like this before, and the wizard agreed with her, while the blonde smiled sweetly, because she was pleased to hear such words related to her great work and efforts, and she also asked Issa to try to feel the aroma of coffee, and she answered that it was similar to caramel or chocolate. Isa admitted with admiration that she could simultaneously taste vanilla, chocolate, and caramel, and this surprised her incredibly, which is why she even looked at the lady with admiration and asked how this was possible, since they didn't even add sugar to the coffee. And to this, the blonde said that the taste of coffee always reveals itself differently. Imagining whole and well-roasted coffee beans, the heroine explained that the beans contain a small amount of sugar, and the sweetness is revealed naturally during the roasting process. After listening to the main character's story, the wizard hurried to try the coffee again, and after one sip, he was incredibly surprised, looking at the cup and imagining caramel behind him. To everyone, he really feels the aroma of caramel. And in the room where there was a beautiful piano, there were luxurious blue curtains and yellow walls. The guy with the girls offered everyone to drink another cup, and at that moment someone suddenly knocked on their door, because of which all the fun instantly died down. The first to be surprised by this was the blonde, who looked at the door in shock and immediately thought about who it could be. But that's why the girl asked Isa to open the door, slightly guessing who it could be. After the maid did what the girl asked, the heroine looked with surprise and big eyes at the one who entered them, because this person turned out to be the same long-awaited guest whom they had all been waiting for so long. That's why not only Duke Klaus Bruggen appeared in her large room, but also several of his subordinates, who nevertheless came to his own wife to try coffee, thanks to the invitation, and the brunette looked very serious and strict as always. The lady immediately got up from the sofa and slowly approached her husband, looking at his face with curiosity and slightly shock, thinking about how she was already sure that he would not come to her. But in the end, everything turned out to be wrong, and this made her a little happy. After looking at the girl in turn, Klaus spoke first, explaining his lateness by saying that he had problems with his vassals. That is, the people who owned the land in his duchy, and that was why he was late, and the lady in front of him listened to him attentively. But the Duke also wanted to look not only at his wife, but also at the wizard, but with a more stern and evil look, and his red eyes, which were clearly visible in the shadow of his face, could frighten everyone who was nearby. Just the man's intense gaze made the sorcerer not only get scared, but also shudder so much that the guy's shoulders began to tremble with anxiety, and his whole body began to sweat, because Gerald was already trying to understand why the aristocrat was looking at him like that. But when the Duke suddenly asked the main character if this was the same sedative she had asked for, the lady looked at the aristocrat in surprise and asked him what he meant and what some sedative had to do with it. The Duke asked the lady again with more details. Didn't she order a sedative from the wizard? After which he looked at her with severity, which made the lady even more surprised, even speechless from surprise. However, the aristocrat himself was in greater shock, because he did not expect at all that after an awkward silence, the lady would laugh heartily and blush, waving her hand at her face and asking her husband if this was a joke. Continuing to laugh, the blonde covered her smile with her hand and thought about how she really knew that ladies often ordered sedatives from wizards, but she still had to ask the gentleman in front of her, which prompted him to think about a sedative. In response, the Duke only looked away from embarrassment and awkwardness, admitting that he had previously thought that it would be difficult for her to get used to new circumstances in the house, so he immediately thought that the lady would decide to order a sedative for herself. And to this, the main character again responded with a smile and a blush on her cheek, saying that everything is completely wrong, because a life without worries is a real miracle for her, and not a reason to buy sedatives and worry in a new place. She decided to confess to everyone that she was not worried at all, but on the contrary, was living the best life she could imagine. And she also turned around and looked at the empty cups, telling the Duke that this was not a sedative at all, but a drink from Adanta. Not only the aristocrat was surprised by this, but also the dark-skinned guard and the male deputy, who stood behind him and were amazed when Klaus continued to look at his wife and ask if she really was able to make a drink from the Adanth tree. The blonde behind the Duke wanted to have his say right away, asking the girl if the fruits of the Adantovo tree didn't taste terrible, to which she replied with a smile that yes, but if you roast and grind the grains exactly as she did, the taste will be better, and she, clapping her hands, invites everyone to see for themselves. The lady suggested this because there were already several cups of aromatic, hot coffee on the table, which had been prepared especially for the arriving guests, and they, in turn, could not help but try the drink that they were seeing for the first time in their lives. But this did not please the guys yet, because all the servants, including the deputy of the Duke and the guard, looked at the coffee a little warily and suspiciously, as if considering the drink some kind of poison. But they had never seen such a strange color of liquid before. The blonde was glad to have new guests and therefore told them to try the coffee with a sweet smile on her face, because the very fact that others would now get acquainted with her efforts for the first time made her very happy. The first to try the coffee was a dark-skinned guard with a scar on his face, who took the first sip and after that, although with a serious face, told everyone that it was great. And the loyalists also praised the deputy duke, who smiled at the protagonist and said that it was amazing. The blonde told his impressions in more detail, explaining that he likes the taste for the following reason. At first, it is slightly bitter, but then, after a few moments, you can feel the caramel flavor, which opens up in your mouth. The happy heroine told the guy that you can serve sweet desserts with this drink and it will be incredibly tasty and unusual, to which he replied that it would be wonderful and that he already wants to try it. Clapping her hands, the girl said that for this occasion she had some cookies, with jelly or chocolate, neatly laid out on a plate, which stood on the table next to a new cup of aromatic coffee. And as soon as the blonde tried the cookies first and then washed the cookies down with a sip of coffee, he began to enjoy the incredible taste of the sweet dessert along with the bitter drink, which fantastically merged together, and the guy imagined it in bright colors. But no matter how happy the heroine was with the compliments and the words about how incredibly she liked the taste of the unusual drink, the girl could not help but turn her attention to the brunette Cluse, who was still holding a cup of coffee in his hands and did not dare to try it. The girl decided to tell the Duke that if he didn't want to try the drink, he didn't have to try it. But that didn't stop the guy, who was already bringing the cup of coffee to his lips and examining its color, having decided to try what his wife had been working on. The blonde watched closely as the Duke slowly took the first sip and immediately after that put the cup with the drink on the table without a single word, which made the lady look at him more closely and ask what the aristocrat would say about her invention. And the girl was very surprised by the fact that the brunette in front of her slowly bowed to his wife and said briefly that he considered this drink to be of high quality and unique, also allowing himself to only grin so imperceptibly that few people noticed it. Because of this, the lady began to smile even more embarrassedly and awkwardly in response, asking herself why the guy had said only 2 words about her drink, as if nothing surprised him anymore. But the lady was also glad that the Duke at least had a pleasant impression. When the blonde kept looking at the cup of coffee and telling the lady that he liked everything, which made the blonde smile and tell the others that she always waits for them here, because she always has a cup of coffee for them. She also approached the brunette and asked him if he was now sure that she was not weaving any intrigues behind his back, which surprised the Duke, suddenly realizing that everything turned out to be completely different from what he had assumed, and all the lady's intentions turned out to be a lie. And the red-eyed guy looked at the girl with understanding, slight surprise, saying that in that case he had nothing more to do here, and he was hinting that he was already ready to leave. After this, the guy actually left and closed the door behind him, without even saying goodbye to his colleagues or his wife, which is why the lady, along with everyone else, looked at the door in defeat, although she did not expect anything else from a serious person. But the Duke's departure did not make the lady despondent, because when the guard and the deputy stood in her room, she decided to tell them about the unusual and useful effect of coffee, doing it with a smile, and the information surprised the servants so much that they opened their mouths in shock. She smiled and thought about how the effect of coffee was very similar to the relaxing effect of tea, or the feeling of energy from eggnog, a dessert made from sugar and eggs. But for now, the lady was in no hurry to explain everything in detail because she wanted everyone to see the effect of coffee with their own eyes and feel it. And so the eventful day passed, which gave the heroine the opportunity not only to prove to the hero that she is not some kind of spy or simply a suspicious person, but also to show everyone her talent and knowledge, to show herself among others and introduce them to coffee when the crimson sunset was already over the luxurious palace. And even the next day, when the Duke's deputy came to the main character again to try the unusual taste of coffee again, the main character was in her room and continued to drink her own drink in the company of the blonde. Every sip of coffee was a real pleasure for the blonde, and therefore he did not hide his satisfied smile, and also told the girl out loud that this drink was incredible, and, as always, incredibly tasty. The guy also decided to confess to the protagonist that when he first tried coffee yesterday and went to the office to finish all the work, he remembers that he sat down at his desk and, being in the dark and surrounded by papers, was surprised that the pain in his back was gone, and he was cheerful and ready to carry out new tasks. And besides this, the polite guy said, "Oh, in gratitude for the coffee and that this drink was able to make him productive yesterday, he brought her a present, that is, a treat in a cute basket, very similar to a pie." Already getting ready to leave, leaving a gift for the lady herself, the blonde stood up from his seat and said that he was glad to see Loanna, and also looked at her for the last time before leaving on business. And after the heroine was left alone again, she leaned back on the sofa and smiled, saying, "Oh, now he wants coffee every day, and even gets gifts for it, constantly lazing around and feeling real happiness in this house." Some time after the lady was left alone and enjoying not only her achievements but also the silence, Issa came in with a cute hat in her hands and asked with a smile if the lady would like to take a walk in the fresh air. The heroine, of course, agreed, and after a few dozen minutes, the Gorenche was already helping the lady get dressed and trying on a hat, asking if they would be picking fruit today, and the blonde answered, no, because they needed time to rest and everything should be in moderation. Turning to the maid with a smile and an upbeat mood, the girl said that on this day they should explore new places and enjoy the rest. And she also suggests that the maid think of a place in the palace where they can take a walk. Then the servant thought about it, asking the lady what she thought about the bush labyrinth. But as soon as the lady heard such a strange name of the place, she immediately became interested in it. Isa told the lady that this labyrinth was designed by the Duchess herself, who lived in the house many years ago. And this made the heroine think about whether the spirit of the Duchess lives in that garden, because she is the very person who planted the adamantine tree around the palace. The protagonist said that in that case, they had to go to this labyrinth, and after the girls got ready and went outside, they immediately noticed beautiful roses of a soft pink color that decorated the garden, and also allowed others to enjoy their wonderful aroma. The blonde already saw a labyrinth of tall bushes in front of her and walked towards it with a question to the maid about whether they would get lost here. And Issa answered that the plants here were planted in such a way that one could always return to only one place. The fresh air, the beautiful place, the green foliage around were so pleasing to the main character, but she began to spin with happiness and tell the maid, Oh, this is wonderful. Oh, it makes the maid smile with joy. But all the fun was interrupted at the moment when both girls heard strange, loud rustling sounds behind them, as if someone had fallen right into the bushes, which made the maid and mistress turn in that direction, and the maid immediately said that she would go and check it out. Isa immediately climbed the steps and headed in the direction where they had both heard sounds the last time. But for now, Mrs. Ide had not suspected that it was not even a bird or a cat. The brown-haired maid looked around the corner, hoping to see some small animal, but it didn't turn out that way. And when, from exactly the place where the maid was, an incredibly terrible scream of Isa was heard, the blonde immediately turned her head in the right direction and with shock realized that she needed to immediately run there and save the girl from possible danger. As soon as she instantly climbed the steps and looked ahead, the girl was shocked to notice a young guy on the path, very similar to Klaus, who was lying on the ground, as if he had fallen and felt discomfort in his body. Pain. The lady was even more surprised and outraged by the fact that the young gentleman turned out to be not only strange, but also evil, because he immediately turned to the heroine and said that this bush was his sleeping place and they needed to clean up, which made the lady puzzled for a moment. The guy's body was not only wearing a white shirt, but also black pants, which the lady noticed on the grass first when she appeared on one side of the labyrinth. The young gentleman was so angry and dissatisfied with being woken up that he started shouting at the lady and saying that he often sleeps here, and on the days when he enjoys sleep here, even the servants have no right to come here and wake him up. The white-haired lady with the hat on her head was so unhappy with this, she was already looking at the guy with frowning eyes and first of all asking who he was. But the maid Isa intervened in the conversation in time, who first of all apologized to Aristotle for waking him up. Noticing that the maid only called the guy young master, the blonde became even more indignant, because she realized that she clearly didn't know something. And also, when she looked at Isa, she saw that she was clearly shaking from stress and afraid of the young man's character. Then the lady looked more closely at the appearance of the guy with red eyes and a dissatisfied face, realizing that now in front of her stood her husband's younger brother named Hardwin, and now he seems to be 17 years old. And although he is similar to his brother, his character is definitely different, constantly getting into trouble, unlike Klaus. But that very fat man, about the heroine, began to look at him intently and examine his face, made the guy smile with the same malice, and he asked her if she was the girl who was Klaus's wife, also saying that he would not allow such a lady as her to look at her with an appraising glance. The heroine was so amazed by this that she didn't say a word about it, because she wanted to sit down in front of the guy and calmly say that she wasn't going to judge him, and didn't even want to compare him to Klaus. But she still looked at Hardwin's fragile and thin body, his thin wrists, realizing that at such a young age he was already being cheeky to strangers, because he hated being compared to his older brother. So she kept looking at him, realizing that the young Duke, Hardwin, was deciding to sleep here and use the leaves as blankets, probably so that everyone would leave him alone and no one would bother him anymore at such a difficult age. Even when the lady calmly asked the guy why he was sleeping here and not on a comfortable bed in the mansion, he turned away from her with real, genuine displeasure on his face and said, "It makes no difference, because no one will even look for him anyway." And this angered the blonde even more because he is the Duke's brother and, of course, is important to everyone. She continued to sit on the grass in front of the boy, who did not want to look at her, thinking about how little she had really heard about him, because he had not even shown up at the wedding. And a couple of months later, at the palace, she saw him for the first time, which testified to Hardwin's detachment. After that, she looked at the cute gazebo with snow-white columns and a rounded roof, drying out about in this beautiful place, where there are not only beautiful buildings and a palace, but also a forest. The guy feels alienated and prefers to just lie on the grass, just not to see everyone. But he continued to speak calmly about it. He was sure of it, and no one cared about him, because he, according to him, was the worst swordsman and student who was no good at all. And when Hardwin was constantly indignant at the girl and told her his problems, sometimes wondering why he was telling her this at all, the lady with her eyes downcast understood that Klaus had simply overshadowed his brother with his own perfection, and everyone had forgotten about Hardwin. She even imagined how a blonde man dressed in luxurious robes sat on the throne like a chosen one, while around him there were only dark shadows, because the heroine understood that the youngest children in aristocratic families, who are of no use to anyone, are forced to become these shadows. The heroine also imagined a priest, remembering that because of the inequality between brothers and because older sons are often valued more than younger ones, many of them decide to become priests, because they need to get on their feet without the help of their families. She also remembered the work of knights with heavy swords and armor, because this is the work that the younger children of families also choose in order to one day leave home and devote their lives to this work, ultimately not becoming beloved heirs or rulers. The heroine's soul became even more painful when she imagined little Hardwin in an empty world in front of a beautiful but gray coffin, realizing that it was even harder for this boy when his mother died. The girl sadly remembered how she herself sat in a dark room and cried in the corner near the closet, realizing that such events would definitely traumatize the child's psyche. And what was even more painful was that Hardwin was 8 and Klaus was 17 at the time their mother died. But the girl did not want to be sad and sink deeper into sorrow, so she threw away all the obsessive thoughts and decided to look at the guy with an encouraged, joyful mood, asking if his name was Hardwin, which made him look at her with indignation and anger, asking if that was not so. Looking at the dissatisfied face of the guy, who continued to look at her only with furrowed brows, the lady thought about how even on the guy's face there was written a request for everyone around to leave him alone. The lady with pink gami understood that she did not want to violate his personal boundaries, but still wanted to get to know him. So she looked at him with a smile and told him her name, wanting to quickly become at least a little closer. In response, the guy only said to the girl with displeasure and was not interested in her name because he did not want to hear any words from her. But the heroine still said her own name as if she would not leave him alone, doing it intentionally. But she was slightly surprised by the fact that the smiling and angry guy himself laughed at her when he said that he already understood that the heroine was trying to attract at least someone to her side in order to have at least some authority in the house. Having heard from the guy that she does absolutely unnecessary things because he considers himself useless, the girl looked at him with displeasure, and in response asked if he has any friends, because she is sure of it. And as soon as the guy heard this, it was as if an electric current passed through him, and he himself became more indignant and angry, asking Amu how she dared ask him such a thing, because he didn't even ask her name. But what surprised the guy even more was that the girl opposite him smiled sweetly and said that she didn't want any attention from him and wouldn't even regret it, because he had only devalued her kind gesture, which she remembered well. And this made Hardwin shut up, looking at the lady as if he was not only shocked, but also in despair, because in fact no one had ever told him such honest things, but only pretended to be friends with him, or even didn't talk to the guy at all. The two of them suddenly seemed to be there. There was nothing superfluous, and they themselves were sitting on the ground and continuing to talk calmly, and the embarrassed guy decided to open up and admit that no one had ever been outraged by his character. However, Galvania Gurnia did not want to stay with him for too long, so after a minute she immediately rose to her feet, shook out her dress, and smiled at Hardwin again, saying that if he still wanted to be friends with her, she suggested that he meet tomorrow at noon. Having heard such a strange proposal, which he had definitely never seen before, the guy froze in bewilderment when in front of him stood not a strict lady at all, but a girl who wanted to get to know him, which is why she was standing with a smile when the wind blew the train of her dress. And only when the guy extended his hand to the heroine as if he wanted to tell her something, the protagonist turned around and walked away from him, ordering the maid herself to go, thereby leaving Hardwin alone with his thoughts. He scratched his head and continued to stare intently at the departing silhouette of the main character, wondering what it was, because the heroine turned out to be not at all the same cold and empty aristocrat as the others. So the main character walked around the beautiful garden labyrinth, after which she decided to return to the mansion and do something else, wanting to no longer think about the strange meeting with her husband's younger brother. The girl was in the bedroom and holding her hat in her hands, taking it off after a walk and asking Issa if Hardwin really didn't eat anything, when she just decided to tell him about it, and it surprised her greatly. Issa stood in front of the heroine and continued to speak, saying that she was telling the truth, because after the tragic death of the Duchess, the senior maid began to look after Hardwin, and he stopped eating, frightening everyone around and worrying them. The girl even imagines a holy water-dwelling gorilla who always brings him full breakfasts, lunches, and dinners, but absolutely always leaves him with her dishes, because Hardwin eats only desserts and drinks alcohol. The main character became sad and looked down, suddenly realizing that the guy had big health problems, or more precisely, a severe eating disorder that needed to be treated. The lady also decided to ask Isa about what the head maid had said, and then the sad maid replied that the head maid had only said that Hardwin was special, and therefore did not pay attention to him, but it sounded strange. This made the blonde angry, wondering how even the head maid could turn a blind eye to the big problem with Hardwin. especially when 8 years had passed since his mother's death and his disorder could have become many times worse. Therefore, the next day, having caught fire with the idea of helping the guy as much as possible, the heroine decided to change into more comfortable clothes, a peach shirt with a skirt, and she was also already looking for the right place for herself, to which she was heading with a basket in her hands. Sometimes she glanced at the objects in the basket and felt sad, wondering if Hardwin would come here at all, because yesterday he had been unhappy with her presence, even though he had heard that she was inviting him to meet. But everything turned out to be much better, because as soon as she turned around and looked at that very snow-white gazebo with columns, she noticed Hardwin in it, who was surprised by her arrival no less than the protagonist herself. She decided to sit down at the table opposite the guy, saying that she was very glad that he had decided to come after all. But the slightly embarrassed guy replied that he hadn't really wanted to come, but had just wanted to take a walk, although that wasn't the case. But when the girl pronounced Hardwin's name, wanting to start a conversation with him, the guy continued to remain silent and did not even look at the lady, although she continued to ask him and hoped that the young gentleman with folded hands would speak to her. However, when the blonde decided to suddenly get up from her seat and tell the guy that if he continues to remain silent, she will go, Hardin was surprised, but did not stop her, at the same time trying to tell the main character to leave because of anger, but at the same time he does not want to be alone. And when the lady herself asked Hardwin if he wanted to tell her to get lost, the black-haired guy excitedly said that, on the contrary, he wanted her to come back, because she herself came to him and does not understand why she is now leaving him. Only then did the girl turn to him with joy and a sweet smile and clap her hands, answering that he still wanted her to stay, and therefore was happy with it. And after that, the heroine decided to put a lot of delicacies and sweets from her own basket on the table, happily telling the guy that she brought all this only for him, because it was just about time for lunch, which meant she needed to eat well. The girl said that all the sweets were there to cheer him up, but when the black-haired guy looked at the table with desserts, he seemed to be unaware of what to say, as if he was surprised by the main character's offer to eat together. His red eyes stared at all the sweets, including the rolls, cupcakes, and cakes that the main character brought, and so he only quietly asked the girl why she was doing this. The guy said that if she wanted to get to know him in this way, he doesn't want it, because he considers himself a real piece of trash. But the heroine didn't like this, who said that there are no useless people because each of them has their own path. She even smiled and kindly asked the guy what his personal life path looked like, trying to calm him down and convince him that all the problems were only in his head and not around him. At first, the guy, surprised by the protagonist's words, looked into Loanna's eyes with defeat, and then suddenly tilted his head down as if he was thinking about his own life, or was embarrassed to look the protanguite in the eyes. Noticing the strange behavior of the guy, who was silent and still could not tell her the right to open up even for one moment, the blonde looked at him with the same sadness and thought that this was all she could get from Hardwin by trying to talk to him. She also watched the sweets on the table, which were still untouched, which made the heroine feel even sadder, and the girl realized that the problem could not be solved in one day. And so, even a week after the last meeting with Hardwin in the gazebo, when the girl in the black dress walked with Isa in the garden, she thought about Klaus's younger brother, and the maid asked her if she was tired after all this time. The lady with the beautiful hairdo and charming face smiled at Isa and said that she wasn't tired at all, that she still wanted to cheer up Hardwin, and that she also thought that it was incredibly hard for her when her own mother died. She made sure that the red-eyed guy tried her desserts at least once, but when the guy held at least one of them in his hands, he would ask her with some indifference why she was doing this. He silently put the plate of peach deterlt on the table and confessed to the main Gurna that he hated food, and therefore did not even plan to try it in the gazebo, where they began to see each other often. But there was still a coldness between them. But the heroine with the neat hairdo was pleasantly surprised by this, because the guy decided to speak for the first time and say something about himself. That's why she looked at him, asking Hardwin what he meant, trying to get him to talk. And the girl's question turned out to be necessary, because the lonely brunette, sitting in the gazebo among the snow-white columns, quietly admitted that when there is at least some food, he begins to experience an incredible feeling of guilt. The lady with pink eyes became even more wary and worried about Hardwin, of course asking him why he felt guilty, intending not to leave it like that. And Hardwin bowed his head in front of her so that even his eyes were not visible. And he also confessed to the heroine that he considered himself a worthless child who did not deserve normal food, warmth from others, or love, With completely tired eyes, as if exhausted by a pale face, he looked at the protagonist and also said that he was sorry for what he did not deserve. Therefore, he did not even allow himself to eat. And the lady continued to listen to him not only with excitement, but also with her lips slightly open from school, because Hardwin supplemented his words with the fact that because of his own mental wounds, he eats only alcohol and sweets, because this is not normal food, which you can never get enough of, but it will at least give strength. Suddenly laughing at his own words and complete apathy, the brunette asked the lady in front of Loanna if he looked pathetic now, to which the girl, alarmed by this, replied that, of course it wasn't so, wanting to cheer him up. After the guy sternly told the heroine that he was sure she was lying, Issa appeared in their company and asked the guy if he wanted milk or juice, as if she also wanted to cheer him up, and Loanna also paid attention to this. Hardwin looked at her with bewilderment, asking the maid why she was suggesting this if she was no longer a child, which made the maid sadly fall silent and the protagonist think again. Isa was silent next to the heroine and apologized to the young gentleman for her own words, and the white-haired lady looked at Hardwin and thought about how she wanted to help the guy, but she understood that the pressure could cause him stress. The lady with pink eyes became more and more lost in her own thoughts, and the girl wondered what could possibly cheer up Hardwin if the milk or juice that had made him happy as a child were no longer something joyful for him. Then she decided to lower her eyes to the table and look at the cute teapot with cups, which already contained a brown-colored drink. And then she asked the young gentleman if he wanted to try it, because there was coffee in front of him. Hardwin asked the girl about it, while the lady was already taking a bowl of milk into her brother's hands and adding it to his coffee, smiling as she told him that she had made this drink from the Adanta tree, and that it was quite good, so she offered him a sip. This surprised the Geosoplin even more, who asked the girl again if it was really a drink made from the fruits of the Adanthus tree, while the girl had already prepared coffee with milk, a drink that had a lighter, more beautiful color, and she also told Hardwin that she called it coffee. At first, the black-haired guy took a cup of coffee in his hand and looked at it with great displeasure, as if he could not bring himself to try it at least once. But after a minute, he nevertheless brought the cup to his lips and tried the drink, which was strange to him. And as soon as he took one sip, he immediately felt bitterness, which made him even more angry and indignant, asking the heroine what this was. Hardwin shouted that this was not a drink at all, but a real abomination that was impossible to even drink. But the blonde looked at him with understanding, telling him to wait a little longer and try some more. But Hardwin sold, sticking out her tongue in disgust and saying, "Ice, oh, this is even more disgusting than he failed the first time, and even with milk. In his words, the taste is terrible and disgusting." And the guy's words made the girl with snow-white hair think about how she would never be able to make a good, delicate latte without a bitter taste, because she still doesn't have a coffee machine that would do everything professionally and quickly, the way it should. The girl discovered this problem a long time ago, and everything seems to be connected with the filter, which does its job, but does not allow adding anything else to the coffee for taste. She also recently suggested to the wizard to make a coffee machine, but he thoughtfully said that it would take a lot of time. At that moment, the white-haired beauty looked at him so sadly and anxiously, as if she could burst into tears in front of him just because of the words about the long period of time it took to create a coffee machine. But now she understands that the coffee machine is a completely new device and the structure will be heavier. Now, when the lady continues to think about her own coffee, she is busy, not dressed to wait for the coffee machine and its invention, so she needs to come up with other ways to make the coffee softer so that at least the milk does not spoil its taste. Sad thoughts suddenly led the lady to some sudden idea, which pleased her and encouraged her in a beautiful garden, which the lady looked at and already wanted to carry out her plan, enjoying the beautiful bridge, pond, and treetops. The next day, when the encouraged main character was in her luxurious white and blue bedroom with a high ceiling and windows, she was already calling Klaus's deputy, named Edward, for an important matter. She herself was dressed in a modest and beautiful red dress and looked at Edward with determination and intent to act. So she spoke loudly. Blano, she had a favor to ask of him. Before this, the guy with golden hair tried the cookies, but as soon as he heard the girl's words, he immediately looked at her and said, of course he would help her in any way, to which the heroine replied, saying that he was very kind to her. But the guy was very surprised when they both sat down at the sofas, the girl confessed to him that she just wanted to visit the kitchen and therefore wanted to. Edward told Klaus about this, and the deputy himself was silently surprised by this, saying that she herself could visit the kitchen and there was no need to demand permission from Klaus. In response, the lady smiled and said that perhaps he was right, but the lady hinted to Edward that she had previously promised the Duke not to interfere with him and to remain in the shadows, and therefore she was worried about her every action. For a moment, the guy with white hair thought about whether his master really made his own wife promise that she would not leave the palace and would be quiet in all respects. He was a little embarrassed, but he still smiled at the girl and told the heroine that of course he would help her. The girl in red thanked the deputy for his help, but then the guy sitting on the couch asked the lady why she needed to go to the kitchen, because if she wanted to take something from there, he could bring it to her at the first request. But the protagonist didn't need it. She was already looking at him with cunning eyes and knew what to do, while at that moment the blonde did not suspect anything. And the smiling lady admitted that she needed the kitchen in order to brew the most delicious and sweet coffee in the world. Edward, a minute after talking with the heroine, found himself in front of the door of Klaus's office, knocking before the entrance and asking the hero if he could enter and waiting for permission, already catching the sound of someone in the room. Entering the Duke's office, the blonde noticed a maid in front of him, who stood with her back to him, because she was talking to an aristocrat who ordered her to immediately assign new maids to his wife's chambers and increase the budget, after which he asked if he could entrust this task to her. The golden-haired guy, while silent, slowly approached the maid closer, listening to her conversation with the Duke, because she answered, of course she would fulfill all his instructions and do everything according to his orders, and at that moment Edward understood that they were talking about Loanna. Edward agreed that Loanna needed better living conditions, and he also looked at the master at the table, and the maid listened to Klaus's order to get to work, after which the girl bowed. When the maid was free and turned her back to everyone to leave, Edward looked at the Duke and already announced that he had come here to talk about Loanna, but he still had no idea that the maid was not going to just leave. The thing is, Edward definitely felt the servant's evil and icy gaze on himself, which even made him turn around and look at the lady with curiosity. But the servant herself at that time was already turning around and leaving behind only guesses and questions. The blonde could only stare and turn around, following the maid with his gaze and wondering whether it was his imagination or whether the maid really looked at him as an enemy. But he needed to talk to the Duke and not waste time on unnecessary thoughts and reflections. So he turned to Klaus, who was already asking him what had happened to his wife, if his subordinate had come with news about her. Then the boy looked at the Duke and told him that Madame Loanna wanted to visit the kitchen and therefore required permission to do so. And he also thought that he was not sure whether he should report this. Hearing such banal words, the Duke even got angry, showing his dissatisfied red eyes to his deputy, and asking Edward why he needed to know this if he already had so much important, necessary work to do. The blonde decided not to leave it like that and continued to stand in front of the Duke, explaining that Loanna was afraid of causing him inconvenience if she went to the kitchen without warning. But this made the red-eyed brunette ask why his wife thought that this could somehow bother him. But when the blonde explained that the Duchess had mentioned the promise she had made to him earlier that she would always be trouble-free and would report on her every action, the Duke fell silent and thought, as if he understood everything. Only after this did the man truly calm down, and with a thoughtful look he realized that Loanna had really given her word that she would be quiet. But her words made him think that the girl was seeing him incorrectly, as if he was a strict leader who only did his job. But when the guy remembered that very moment when, at their first meeting, he looked at his wife with coldness and anger, ordering her not to get underfoot, he became puzzled and fell silent, realizing that he did not take very good care of her and mistakenly thought that he was cold, like on the outside. However, after that, he calmly closed his eyes and remembered that now he had assigned her many more servants and increased expenses, which would help the lady to definitely change her opinion of him. And he also wanted the maid he had now to take good care of this. While the man was thinking and reasoning about his wife, he needed to explain to her why he did not allow her to stay in the main castle, but only in the nearby one. He did not notice how he squeezed the paper on the table with his hands, which made the blonde look at it with curiosity and ask the gentleman if this was not an important document about work. As a result, the Duke ordered his deputy to convey to his wife the words that she could visit the kitchen at any time. The main character herself was already walking down the corridor in a beautiful dress, and her silhouette was visible in the high window. The girl had already been informed that Klaus, of course, allowed her to visit the kitchen, and she really liked it, asking to smile, because of which everything around seemed brighter and more beautiful, because she gradually began to do what she liked without disturbing others. That's why the girl with the same beautiful smile and good mood appeared in the large kitchen of the palace together with Isa. when suddenly a red-haired cook appeared in front of them and greeted the ladies, saying that if they wanted to try something, he could simply cook it and bring it through the maids. But when the protagonist replied that she didn't need ready-made dishes because she was going to cook something herself, the cook demonstratively clapped his hands and seemed to be happy about it. Immediately after that, he looked at the lady with a slightly strange expression on his face and asked if Loana wanted to cook Neo for Duke Klaus, as if he was already sure of it. In response, the blonde in the red dress laughed sweetly and asked the cook if he thought she wanted to poison Garag. But of course not. The girl laughed again and told the man that he didn't need to worry about it, because it wasn't for the Duke, which made the red-haired cook answer doubtfully, saying that he understood it. Although the lady's intentions interested him even more, and he thought about what the lady wanted. The cook decided to ask the girl what ingredients she needed, and after the heroine listed everything she needed, he laid out the necessary jars on the table, or rather vanilla extract, cinnamon, honey with nutmeg and warm milk. And then the lady confidently placed her hands on her hips and asked herself with a smile whether it was necessary to start preparing that very coffee that would not be bitter, but pleasant and no less useful. Like a pure drink. The first thing the girl did to start was to add a spoonful of fresh aromatic honey to the required container, which is not only sweet, but also a pleasant natural sweetener. After this, the lady added not only milk and honey to the glass container, but also a teaspoon of vanilla and cinnamon. And all this in order to finally add coffee. The lady with pink eyes watched carefully as all the necessary ingredients were mixed in the vase, and she also added the recently brewed coffee to them. She did it carefully and slowly on purpose, both flavors mixed harmoniously. And after the smiling lady managed to prepare an incredibly aromatic drink based on coffee, she poured it into a special container that the wizard Gerald had given her in advance to preserve the taste and warmth of the coffee. And at that time, behind her, 2 cooks were visible, who were surprised by the aroma in the kitchen and said, "Oh, it's wonderful." Having closed the container, very similar to a thermos with a lid, the girl also decided to supplement her sweet basket not only with coffee, but also with berries and pastries, making sure that Hardwin would definitely like it and try her dishes with drinks. And while the main character was already about to show up with a big surprise, which she had been working on for hours, Hardwin himself was already sitting in the snow-white gazebo and calmly waiting for Loana to appear, because at this time they were already accustomed to holding meetings. He didn't have to wait long because a minute later a girl appeared in his field of vision, still wearing a red dress and easy to spot. So the guy looked at her with slight surprise, waiting to see what she would say this time. The blonde smiled and greeted Hardwin, while behind her the maid also grinned and already knew that the mistress had prepared a big surprise for the guy, which she would present to him any minute. But Hardwin himself, it seems, was not even surprised by the girl's appearance and did not greet them with open arms, because he yawned and behaved as if he felt tired and powerless by the middle of the day. The girls noticed Hardwin's behavior, and the protagonist didn't have time to guess about it, because the maid Issa immediately whispered in her ear that yesterday the guy drank only alcohol and therefore felt tired, also saying that today, like yesterday, he didn't even eat a small candy, which surprised the lady. Out of sadness, the girl closed her veil and thought about how now it was absolutely clear to her why the guy was so lethargic and seemed tired all day long, and his bad mood didn't even allow him to enjoy life normally. But the girl wasn't going to be sad either, because right after that she put a basket of sweets on the table with a smile, because of which the brunette in front of her involuntarily said that he didn't want to eat at all, and he also asked if she was tired of persistently offering something of her own. In response, the girl only continued to lay out various goodies, asking the guy if he really doesn't eat or drink. But then the guy showed his teeth and said out of displeasure that everything depends on the drink, and also warned that he doesn't want to try that tasteless latte that she tried to give him earlier. However, Hardwin's words were unnecessary because the girl was already pouring a golden drink with coffee and honey into a beautiful cup, saying that this was a completely different coffee, which she was offering him to at least try in one sip. Looking at the cup of coffee in surprise, the red-eyed guy asked the lady if he saw liquid gold in front of him now, but the lady only laughed in response, saying, "Oh, it's not quite that. Or rather, honey coffee." The protagonist said this solemnly and joyfully, and Loana's words made the guy look again at the coffee, which was not only charming in appearance, but also smelled pleasant, because it smelled of honey, aromatic cinnamon, and vanilla. Hardwin immediately asked the lady in surprise if there was a cup of that same humpbacked coffee in front of him that he had tried earlier, and the lady in the red dress answered with a smile that everything was correct, but this time she had added more ingredients to it. Having said once again that this was a type of coffee that he would definitely like, the girl presented the drink to the guy and asked him to try it, which made Hardwin fall silent, looking at the delicious cup of hot, honeyed wonder. The lady asked him to drink it while the coffee was still warm, causing Hardwin to pick up the cup and look at it thoughtfully, gathering the courage to try the strange drink again. As soon as he tried at least one sip of the drink, Hardwin immediately became pleasantly pleased with the taste and even blushed, looking at it as if it were magic and realizing that it turned out to be more pleasant and tastier than the ordinary coffee that the heroine gave him to try. She immediately imagined cinnamon, honey, and vanilla around a cup of honey coffee, asking the heroine if he understood that the taste was very deep, for the reason that after just one sip, he felt a variety of aftertastes. Hardwin was even more surprised by the pleasant color and texture of the coffee, realizing that the milk in the drink gave the coffee an exquisite sweetness. And even after the first sip, he wanted to try more and more. Looking at the beautiful cup with golden patterns, the guy suddenly realized that this was not the kind of coffee that was bitter in the mouth and made you want to burp, but an aristocratic apioc that not only pleased him but also lifted his spirits. Hardwin continued to look at the cup with a red face from embarrassment and confessed to the heroine that he had never drunk such a wonderful, hot drink, the taste of which he would hardly ever forget. But that was not all. The girl brought him not only coffee but also snacks, and so she presented him with golden buns with bright purple cream, offering him to drink delicious coffee. In front of him, the guy looked with surprise at the kind blonde who offered him desserts, thereby hinting that for the first time he should eat a little more and healthier than the young man was used to. And this made the guy just take the bun in his hand and try it silently, without reproaches and anger. Oh, of course, he made the main character happy, who previously spent time only in the kitchen just for this moment. Hardwin remained silent and tasted the bun until the blonde continued to smile, confessing to him that she had baked the buns and made the coffee especially for him and no one else. But that was not all, because when the lady looked at Hardwin with a smile and seemed to be able to only rejoice that he was now eating, she suddenly noticed the young man's tears, which he wiped with his hand and asked in a trembling voice what was happening to him. The thing is, he remembered himself in childhood, when one maid appeared before him and with an incredibly scary look said that it was he who did not deserve food and drink, because he was a loser, unlike his older brother, the ideal heir. Hardwin realized he had forgotten when he had ever been cared for, and out of sadness he remembered those moments in childhood when he stood in a dark corridor and his same older brother Klaus appeared in front of him. The thing is, Klaus wanted to ask his brother why he didn't show up for a joint family dinner, but the frightened boy with red eyes only looked at the floor in embarrassment and said that he was simply distracted, although in fact the evil maid didn't give him anything to eat. That's why even now the guy considers himself a real lowlife, crying in front of the main character and continued to sit in the gazebo, which the lady in the red dress was very surprised at. She knew that it shouldn't be like that. Deciding to cheer the guy up and show him some warmth, the protagonist walked up to him and placed her hand on his shoulder with a smile, which made the guy raise his head and look at Loanna as if she had become his true salvation and a ray of sunshine in the darkness. The lady turned out to be not at all evil, but understanding and kind, and after that she grabbed Hardwin by the hand and pulled him along, hinting that they already needed to go home because of the sunset, and the tearful gentleman only thanked the lady for her help and support. The garden was very beautiful and magical, because a rich, deep sunset decorated the sky and all the trees near the palace, while Protanoitskaya, together with the maid Isa and Hardwin, walked through such places. The guy tried not to leave the girl, but he was not used to walking with someone, so he asked the ladies with curiosity why they were walking together, and the girls only smiled at him. Were happy that Hartvin, who was previously closed and angry with everyone, suddenly became docile and calm, more lively. The lady with pink eyes and a sweet smile looked at Hardwin and explained that every time they said goodbye too soon and suddenly, and that was why she was worried about whether he would get home safely. At that moment, the guy, who seemed to be a black cat with ears and a long tail, which would immediately wag in different directions if it existed, looked at the lady and with curiosity understood that she was worried about him and that he was pleased. The heroine liked all this, and therefore she smiled sweetly, thinking about how she now seemed to have a younger sister and brother who always followed her around and were, although not family, close people. But when they were walking along the road in a group and talking about something of their own, intending to get to the palace at sunset, they did not even suspect that the one who was ahead and meeting them was already looking at them. The first to notice the man was the main character, who looked at him with genuine surprise, because she recognized him as her friend named Edward, the deputy of Duke Klaus. The blonde was no less glad to see the protagonist, so he looked at her with a smile when the lady came closer and told him that they had already walked and were planning to go to the palace, and she also wanted to tell him about her affairs. But when the lady pleasantly thanked the deputy for his help, thanks to which she could already visit the kitchen and calmly prepare coffee there, she, like Edward, did not suspect that another person had already approached them, to whom the alarmed Hardwin drew attention. Hardwin immediately lowered his head down and said nothing more, because in front of him was his older brother, Klaus, who calmly looked at him and asked him what he was doing here. And the boy could not utter a word because of embarrassment. He also said with displeasure that he didn't think that Hardwin and the main character were so close and were like friends, while looking at his brother with coldness, which made Hardwin even more embarrassed and didn't know how to answer. The young gentleman was even afraid to look at his elder brother, so with trembling lips he tried to explain to the Duke that they had met in the garden near the labyrinth, in the very place where he hid from everyone and from his studies. After that, the boy immediately apologized to his older brother, thinking that he would be incredibly angry because of his truancy regarding his studies, and therefore he continued to look only at the ground, and his good mood suddenly disappeared. But the Duke was in no hurry to get angry or express his displeasure, because for now he only looked at his younger brother with coldness and emptiness, as if he truly hated him, like everyone else. Looking more closely at the guy in front of him, the man realized that he saw a thin and small, skinny young man who urgently needed to train and attend classes, and not be sad. And out of anger, he clenched his own hand into a fist, because he realized that his younger brother still did not love him. And perhaps he even hated him, after the tragic death of his mother. Because of the sad thoughts, the guy remembered how he was still young, and after separation from his mother, he was alone, even had dinner alone, where there was no one except him. And now he sadly understands that he abandoned the upbringing of his younger brother, which was necessary. He looked at the red chair that should have been occupied by a member of his family or Hardwin himself, but the sad Klaus, who was eating alone, could only think about his brother. But even when they appeared in a dark corridor and Klaus tried to find out from his brother where he was and why he disappeared, didn't show up for dinner, even extended his hand to Hardwin. But the boy turned around and walked away, although in fact there were just a lot of misunderstandings between them. And between them, it turned out, there was an evil maid. It made Klaus worry, but he still looked at his brother leaving with sadness, as if he thought the problem was him, and Hardwin didn't want to see him because of the cold. As if there couldn't be anything good between them now. Hadwin didn't even want to see him. And now, because the boys had experienced a lot of painful things, they stood in front of each other and were silent because of the awkwardness. But thanks to this, Klaus understood that this had to end, and he had to lead him like an adult. He had to say something. As soon as he addressed Hardwin by name, the little boy in front of him became so scared that he shuddered on the spot, looking at his older brother as if he was about to scold and lecture him. Everything turned out as the guy was afraid, because Klaus in front of him said in a stern voice that he should immediately go to class and not be late. And because of these words, the guy smiled in fear. But the tense relationship between them could not go unnoticed by the main character, who hastened to appear between them with a suspicious face, as if she already knew that they were not getting along and wanted to fix it. She had to intervene when Hardwin said to himself again. There was no doubt about it, he was useless, and so the lady slapped her hand across her face, mocking Klaus and asking him how he could do that, which the Duke was genuinely surprised at. She didn't just interrupt the conversation, but stood between Hardwin and Cadaus, asking the latter if he even knew that his younger brother was in incredibly bad shape right now, also looking at him with a stern look. When the guy in front of her answered discontentedly, saying that he doesn't ask his brother about anything directly, but tries to make reports, the blonde got even more furious and said that simple reports on paper are not enough for his brother to be happy. After this, the surprised guy asked his wife what she meant by this, when there was still more tension and anger between them. And not far from the couple, the water from the fountain murmured melodically. The red-eyed guy with black hair looked at the lady in surprise and continued to be surprised by her behavior when the girl with snow-white hair and a strong character asked why Klaus did not realize what his brother was going through and how bad he was. But the lady still insisted on her own, looking at her husband with complete severity and asking him about it, whether he could guess the exact reason why Hardwin skipped classes and generally did not appear in public. Only then did Klaus seem to crack, lower his head, and quietly confess to the heroine that he had never really thought about it. something he was now ashamed and embarrassed about in front of everyone. And Proacnoidskaya still got her way, looked at Klaus with anger and told him to be kinder to Hardwin, more attentive, because then he would understand why he was doing what he wanted, not showing up for classes. At that moment, the brunette really thought about it, then remembered that he had previously appointed a person who would closely monitor Hardwin, and now he was asking himself a logical question: why everything was so bad, and whether this was enough for his brother's comfort. He looked at the sad Hardwin, who was afraid to even look at Klaus, and Grog himself at that time wondered what else he could do for the boy's condition. To resolve all the issues, the guy decided to show the main character his hand and calmly say that he admits that he was inattentive, and immediately after that he turned to Hardwin, who was standing in front of him and was already talking to any adult word. As it turned out, Hardwin's fear was unnecessary, because for the first time in a long time, the red-eyed guy went to him with a calm look and offered his younger brother to just talk. As the conversation was in a calm atmosphere, they decided to go into the palace and take a large, slightly dark room with a luxurious brown interior, where the Duke sat down on the sofa and was already prepared to speak with his brother honestly and truthfully, sighing from fatigue and looking at Hardwin, who was sitting on another red sofa. The aristocrat first asked his brother why he was skipping classes, but Hardwin was still worried, looking at Klaus with shock. He was surprised that his brother's old man was interested in his life for the first time in his life, so he tried to say something accusatory. The Duke also asked if his studies were too difficult, and the boy replied that of course it wasn't so, and that wasn't the point. The Duke also asked if the lessons were too boring, and when the boy answered again that everything was wrong, the aristocrat only got angry and folded his arms, asking the boy with a stern look what was the matter then. And because of this, the red-eyed Hardwin looked down, and with a zealous expression on his face, he realized that if his older brother was giving him even a drop of time for the first time, he wanted to use this chance to express everything that was needed and was on his mind. Although he was too tense, which is why he sat on the sofa uncertainly and clenched his hands into fists, admitting to his older brother that in fact it was difficult for him to communicate with people, and as soon as he said this, a chill ran through his body, and the awkwardness only increased. And in addition to problems with communication, with society, the guy who was sitting on the couch with the company of not only Klaus, but also the main character, admitted to everyone that he knows that he is not as good and perfect as his older brother, and just the thought of it hurts his heart. Hardwin thought that his older brother would get angry again, make a remark, or even say that everything was wrong. But he was really shocked by the fact that Klaus looked at him with shock and veins on his face from anger, asking who dared to say such a thing to him. This surprised the boy so much that he raised his head and looked at his brother with an equally shocked face, asking what he meant. Although in fact, the smart Klaus already guessed that a third person, an extra one, could be involved in his brother's bad mental state and not just the death of his mother. But Klaus insisted on his own. Because he was so irritated and angry, he looked at Hardwin and did not look away, constantly asking who dared to say such a thing to him and, even sadder, convince him of it. The shy guy lowered his head again and said with a smile that everyone already knew that he was worthless and an ordinary loser. But for Klaus and the protagonist, this was not a satisfactory answer. A deep silence fell in the room with its high ceiling and luxurious ornaments, in which everyone felt awkward. But only thanks to it, Duke Klaus understood that someone else was definitely to blame for his younger brother's condition, and that it made him incredibly angry. Clenching his fist tightly and trying not to let all his rage out prematurely, he decided to stand up and calmly approach Hardwin, which surprised and scared him at the same time. The first thing the guy did was put his hand on the head of the shy Hardwin and said that everything was completely different from what he said and that he was not a lowlife, which made the guy even more embarrassed. Stroking his younger brother's head, Klaus looked at Hardwin with regret and pain, realizing that all this time his loved one was having a hard time and was in pain, while the boy himself was surprised by Klaus's warmth. Hardwin was truly amazed by his brother's kindness at the moment when he looked at him with sadness, and once again tried to convince him that his brother was not the idiot that he was accustomed to seeing and considering himself to be. When Klaus said that he should now go to classes and not be afraid of anything anymore, Hardwin did not just smile, but burst into tears and blushed, thanking Klaus for his concern, while tears dripped down his face without stopping. Only after this did Klaus smile as if he had hope for something good, which he himself must build. And now his strict image of a leader faded into the background, revealing himself to everyone from a better, new side. But suddenly, Klaus turned to the blonde, who was in a red dress and had been sitting silently next to them all this time. And hearing that the Duke had turned to her, the lady perked up and asked the aristocrat what he needed. Klaus smiled at her with the same warmth and kindness, because in fact, he decided to thank the girl for her care and the fact that she was the first to take away the anxiety, and drew attention to Hardwin's condition, thanks to which everything became clear to everyone. However, as it turned out, the guy wanted to say something again that was important to him, because he did not finish his last sentence, and because of this, the heroine continued to sit on the red chair, waiting for the aristocrat to speak. But he only remained silent, looking at her, and looked even more awkward. As it turned out, the Duke wanted to confess to the girl that now she can visit the kitchen as much as necessary, and even without permission. Because of him, the lady was surprised at first, and then smiled sweetly, thanking him for this and understanding that now nothing will interfere with her work in the kitchen. But even after he said everything he needed to, Klaus still didn't take his eyes off his wife, as if he was caught by the girl's appearance and her smile. And he also fleetingly thought that Loana looked like a little rabbit with a white fur coat. Klaus thought about it. He also wanted to ask the main character about whether the maid fulfills her demands, and besides that, he wanted to finally explain why he told the protagonist to avoid the main castle. But in the end, he only said goodbye to everyone, thinking that he would leave this conversation for later. But suddenly, Hardwin, sitting next to him, wanted to say something. As it turned out, he was so overwhelmed with joy and the desire to share bright emotions about the king, looking at the main character and telling her, about Klaus only about calling him not useless, about him instantly became happy. He also hastened to take Loana's palms in his hands and sincerely thank her for her support and help, admitting that all this happened only thanks to her, and this, of course, was pleasant for the heroine, and she was no less happy. Loana excitedly told the kid that if he was going to attend classes on a regular basis now, they would no longer meet in the gazebo with cookies, which surprised the boy and made him think that he didn't want to say goodbye to it. And he smiled only when it became clear that they would have plenty of time to meet after classes, which made Hardwin laugh with joy. And Loana promised the boy that she would wait for him right after school. That's how the evening ended, when Klaus and his younger brother and Lana became a little closer. And after that, when the sky was getting darker and the stars were appearing, everyone came to their chambers, being in a high and beautiful snow-white palace. The main character had already appeared in her own bedroom and greeted the maid Isa in front of her, apologizing for her long absence. But in response, the lady only smiled and said that everything was fine, and that she, on the contrary, was even glad to see her. And after some time, when the protagonist said goodbye to everyone and was left alone, she freely and tiredly lay down on the snow-white soft bed and smiled, realizing that the day had been long and exhausting, but it was all worth it. Sometimes she looked at the large and bright meadow outside the high window, happy with the thought that everything went well and life in the south was not as bad as she had thought before. And life in such a castle even suited her. And the next bright day, when Gavlin Gurnia was about to appear right in front of the wonderful castle of the wizard Gerald with a red triangular roof, she already wanted to see her old friend, to see if he had made any new inventions. She appeared in a luxurious and discreet outfit with brown and peach colors, smiling at Gerald and asking him if he had already made the coffee machine they had talked about days ago. But Gerald himself was not so happy about the appearance of the main character, so he looked at her with a tired and dissatisfied face, saying irritably that it would take much longer to create a coffee machine than previously expected. Having imagined the very coffee machine in copper which he was about to create, the wizard said that she still had no idea how difficult it was to create something like that, because, for example, the machine had to have an adjustable pressure function, but it seemed that no one had ever created one before. The lady replied that she understood everything and all this was necessary so that the machine could compact coffee and make latte. But after that, the red-haired guy started crying, telling the heroine that even such a talented wizard as he could not create something incredible. Noticing the sorcerer's sad mood, the girl immediately snatched a bottle of hot drink from behind her back, joyfully saying that it was coffee to lift his mood and fighting spirit. And the wizard just took the bottle in his hand and happily tried the gift. And the blonde was incredibly pleased that after that, the guy calmly said that in a month he would still be able to create a coffee machine, which made the lady smile and laugh with delight and anticipation. That's exactly how the lady's meeting with the wizard went. After which, she was in a good mood and was already in her own palace, wearing a new dress and with her maid Isa, with whom she had a fun time, thinking that in a month she would have the long-awaited coffee machine in her hands. But after there was a knock on the door, Iha stepped back and said that she would open it for the guest. The heroine wondered who it could be, but she was even more amazed by the fact that in front of her was not a wizard or Harvin, but a maid with green hair who smiled suspiciously and curtsied before her mistress. Although the maid was smiling, in reality, her face, along with her bright and scary green eyes, was looking at the heroine and saying that the main maid had personally chosen her as her servant, so she couldn't wait to start working for her. The blonde didn't like this news, especially when the servant looked strange and suspicious to her. So the mistress immediately said that she didn't ask to appoint another servant because she was comfortable with Iza. Also, the lady with pink eyes sternly told the green-haired Garincha that one girl is enough and she is a good servant, which made Iza behind the heroine cry with joy. And Ioana told the lady who arrived that she does not understand what all this is for. But even this did not stop the maid, who continued to smile slyly and tell everyone that she still could not leave due to the orders of the head maid. Therefore, when she confessed to the heroine with a grin that it was Duke Klaus who ordered a new maid to be assigned to her, Loana was amazed and angry at the same time, thinking that she could not even guess about this before. It became even clearer for the protagonist that Klaus seemed to be trying to spy on her through the servants. And so she strictly ordered the new maid to go to the pantry and work there, which the green-haired lady was outraged by, and was shocked, saying that it was unfair because she was a personal maid. Loana knew that the new maid was angry with her, and therefore was already looking at her with seriousness and displeasure, ordering her to go back to work in the pantry, although she was not next to her and could not eavesdrop on her. The lady also said that if she needed her help, she would definitely call her, and then the girl with green hair had to disagree with the lady's words, bowing and saying that let it be as only she orders. Sometime after this strange incident, when the heroine was sitting in the garden and drinking coffee at the table, a maid came to her and sweetly announced that she had a letter from Hardwin, which surprised the blonde. But when the heroine just wanted to read the letter, she looked to the side and with shock noticed the servant Inga hiding behind a tree not far from her, who was definitely watching her and trying to get more important information, and there was no doubt that she was a spy working for someone. The lady remained calm in appearance, still sitting in the gazebo with the letter in her hands, because she was thinking about the fact that while the maid did not pose a threat and the girl hoped that Klaus would understand, there was nothing to worry about. Only after this, the smiling main character decided to open the letter and read it, thanks to which she learned with a smile that Hardwin wanted to invite a special guest next week, who she would definitely like, and therefore decided to write to her about it. And Loana liked this news. And the lady decided, with the same warm smile, to take up a pen in order to write Hardwin a reply, saying that she was looking forward to meeting him and wished him all the best. And while the heroine was already handing the letter to the maid Iza and asking her to pass on the message to Hardwin, a little earlier, Inga met with the head maid in a dark room, where the green-haired lady listened to evil words from her mentor about how Loana posed a serious danger to their duchy. Out of rage and anger towards the Duke's new wife, the senior maid even grabbed Inga by the shoulders and shouted that Loana was definitely hiding some secrets that they needed to find, and that she was entrusting this task to the frightened Inga, who from that moment on would work not only as a maid, but also as a chambermaid. It was this incident with the terrible Garincha that Inga remembered as she stood before the doors to the luxurious room. Thinking about it, a week had already passed since then, and she definitely needed to find out something in such a short time so as not to receive punishment from her boss. Thinking that she still needed to find out at least something necessary in order to come to the head maid with a report, Inga decided to enter Loana's chambers and stand in front of her, which is why the curious blonde asked the servant what had happened. The uncertain maid stood in front of her mistress and thought about what she needed to tell her, that she was going to the main castle herself. But she was afraid that in that case, Loana would understand everything and would not allow her to leave. But she still decided to tell her that she had left some things in that place that needed to be picked up. But what was Inga's surprise when Loana didn't even look at her, wanting to continue reading something in her hands and nodding to the spy, as if she could of course go to the right place if there were important things left in the main castle. Then Inga smiled imperceptibly, realizing that it was much easier to penetrate the main castle than she thought. And she also thanked Loana for her answer, saying that she would return soon, although in fact she already had her own plan. As it turned out, Inga was going to the castle to meet the senior maid, and only when she appeared in that very dark wooden room she looked at Inga with crazy joy, because she was already waiting for the most important news and rumors from her ward. But the head maid's expectations were not met, because when she asked the green-haired girl with the same impatience whether she had managed to find out anything unimportant, Inga only answered fearfully, saying that she had not been able to see anything suspicious in a week since Loana only lazed around and read novels all day. This did not please the head maid at all, who became angry and indignantly responded that there must be at least something, that she poses a threat to the duchy. But Inga responded that she did not see any danger in Madame Loana. However, as soon as Inga told about Loana often drinking a strange, dark liquid from a cup, which she imagined behind her, the mood of the old hotel room instantly changed for the better. Hearing this, the crazy maid began to laugh and with crazy eyes says to Inga, Loana is a real witch who drinks a strange liquid in order to hide her true appearance, which is why she has a strange, silvery hair color. But when Insha also told him that she didn't see anything bad in this liquid, because not only Loana drinks it, but also others, including Hardwin, the maid became indignant and angry about this to the point of veins on her face. Remembering that she had previously categorically forbidden the boy to stay close to anyone, out of anger, she clutched the train of her dress into a fist and clenched her teeth, asking Inga through them how Hardwin dared to disobey her. But she was more enraged, according to the maid, by the fact that Loana allegedly filed complaints about the small budget in the palace. Nervously biting her thumbnail, the girl told Inga that Loana could not be allowed to take over the palace and control the Duke's decisions. So she needed to come up with a plan. It seemed that it was the coffee grinder that caught the attention of the head maid. But while the maids were thinking about how to harm Loana, the blonde's coffee-making equipment still stood on the table and shone, decorating the interior. And Hardwin's arrival was a real surprise for Loana, because the boy appeared in her room not only in a good mood and with a smile on his face, but also with a beautiful bouquet of sunflowers in his hands, which he prepared especially for the main character. Loana took the boy's gift in her hands and greeted it with no less joy, saying that she was very pleased and that the flowers smelled wonderful. And after that, the red-eyed guy already wanted to introduce the lady to his guest, who was nearby and whom he mentioned in the letter. The guest in her room turned out to be quite unusual, because he was a tall man with white hair and a beard, with a bandage over one eye and clothes like gardeners. Which is why, when the lady looked at him, she was surprised to assume that it was he in front of her. The first man to introduce herself was the lady who put her hand on her cleavage and said that she was Loana Bruggen, which also made the gardener pleasantly surprised. The gardener himself bowed to the lady in the same way and said that he was very pleased to deal with her, and his name was Ness. And in this palace, he really worked as a gardener, taking care of all the bushes and trees, flower beds, and paths around the buildings. The white-haired lady in front of him also said that she was glad to meet him, calling the man in front of her sir. But then the gardener picked up his hat and was slightly surprised, telling the heroine that there was no need to call him so formally. To this, the sweet girl with pale skin and snow-white locks responded that she noticed that Hardwin treated him with respect, so she also decided to show good manners. And the man with the eye patch liked it. He smiled back at the heroine and thanked her for such a gesture. But most of all, the heroine was interested in the reason why Hardwin decided to introduce her to such a person. At the same time, she wanted to invite the guest to her place and please him. Turning around, the lady showed with her hand the place where they would spend time, which made Harvin and the gardener Nez smile and walk together behind the protagonist, and Harvin thanked the lady for her care, when the lady replied that it was not difficult for her to look after them and she would also bring them delicious coffee. After that, the gardener and Hardwin sat down on the wide and comfortable sofas and began to have a nice conversation about how Loana's coffee was amazing and incredibly tasty, and Nez seemed to only agree with this. The red-eyed guy, smiling and happy, told the gardener that his friend's coffee not only tasted good, but also had a special aroma, a bitterness that you always wanted to try again and again. In response, the gardener only looked surprised and stared at Hardwin, amazed at his animation and saying that now he understood the reason why he began to eat so well and behave happily. This only made the boy laugh and smile even more, confessing to the gardener that as soon as he tried Loana's honey coffee, his appetite increased incredibly, not only returned. And Ness said that his words only fueled his interest. And while Hardwin and the gardener were having a nice conversation about the main character's coffee, her skills, and delicious invention, the protagonist herself had already prepared her signature drink for them, after which she turned around and shouted to everyone that she was already on her way to them with a gift. And in front of the surprised gardener named Njes, there was a strange-colored but pleasant-smelling drink, poured into 3 charming cups, which Njes was amazed at, and said that now he understood what such a miracle looked like, and the main character said to try her gift as soon as possible. Even when he took 1 cup of coffee in his hands, the gardener did not cease to be amazed by the pleasant aroma of the drink, because he heard that this miracle smells of nuts and bitterness, which is why he wants to try coffee for the first time as soon as possible. And while the gardener was admitting that even at that age he still tries coffee like a child in childhood, the blonde slowly looked away and understood that she didn't have to worry about the taste of the coffee, because she didn't have to worry about what people would think if she no longer worked in a cafe. And as soon as the gardener Nez tried the coffee, he immediately felt a rich and slightly bitter taste, which vaguely resembled liqueur, which he confessed to the heroine, also saying that he could not even describe it. The gardener continued to speak, saying that he was also surprised by the fact that at the end of drinking, each time floral notes in the coffee were revealed, and the lady looked at him with curiosity, because she did not expect that he would be so happy with the new taste and say so many words about her drink. The girl looked at the gardener with interesting and slight surprise, because she remembered that she had recently started roasting the beans on a softer Podarka, and fortunately found out that, unlike the dark Podarka, it gives the drink a more intricate taste. Having imagined those same lighter and therefore slightly roasted coffee beans, the girl realized that it was precisely thanks to this technology that the floral aroma could be felt in the taste of coffee. And while the lady was surprised that the gardener in front of her was able to accurately convey the taste of coffee, and also it seems he has good taste buds, Ness suddenly said that after all this drink is not for him, which amazed and slightly angered the girl, and she, with an astonished face, asked the guest whether it was tasty for him. The girl briefly asked the man about this, but the only answer she received was his calm look and words about how this drink was simply not to his taste, but he was telling the truth about it. But he could also say something that the heroine might not want to hear. And then the lady with pink eyes confidently and decisively told the guy that of course she wanted to know the truth about her drink, and that's why she wanted the gardener to tell her all his thoughts, even if some of them would probably offend her. But when the girl and everyone else were looking closely at the drink and the beautiful cups that they were talking about, the gardener suddenly admitted that these were just his assumptions, but in his opinion, this hot drink was too perfect, which surprised Loanna to the depths of her soul. Also, the gardener, Nez, asked the lady how long he had been making coffee, and when the heroine answered honestly that she had been working with coffee beans for about 2 months, the man paused and thought harder about something of his own. The man with the eye patch began to thoughtfully touch his chin and tell the heroine that, in his humble opinion, the taste of the coffee was too perfect and deep, as if a real professional had worked on it, who had been making this masterpiece for years, not months. And the main character was silent, wanting to hear more words from such a person. And then the white-haired man with a broad back confessed to everyone that he himself had encountered perfection in work. But he realized that it gets boring very quickly, especially if it is repeated for several years in the mansion where you work. Looking at the gardener in surprise, the white-haired lady realized that in that world, attention to detail was especially important, and that Nez was also trained in this, which is why she now wonders if it is possible to create something like this that would please him exclusively. That's why she decided to ask the old man what flavors he wanted to try in his coffee, and the bandaged gardener only replied that he was too old to be picky, hinting that he liked everything anyway. But when the lady also wanted to ask the gardener whether he was interested in what was interesting to him and not to someone else, and whether the gentleman had any favorite dishes, the man with the bandage responded with a warm smile and said that it was all not so important. However, Loanna still managed to get the old man to talk, because at that moment, when outside the window of their luxurious room not only the trunks and leaves of the trees were visible, but also the birds could be heard, the gardener began his own story with the fact that a long time ago in the South there was a war, which affected him. The blonde continued to listen to the old man and recall the fiery events of that very war, telling Nez that she had heard about the war that had been 60 years ago and in which the South had to take part, because it had grown. The heroine became even more interested in the story when the old man confessed that earlier there were no cafes on every corner, and they were not as fashionable as they are now, because in his age everything was completely different. The old man told me that he was 20 years old and served in the army and remembered very well the times when he and the soldiers dreamed of a good drink or at least decent housing. When the three of them would sit and have a pleasant conversation, take shelter from the rain in a cave, and drink unfiltered beer with pieces of malt and hops. He admitted that it was precisely these get-togethers with his comrades and alcohol that helped him stay on his feet. And when the heroine looked at him with understanding, he admitted that he never missed the war, but he definitely wanted to try that strong drink again. After that, the man sighed and said sadly that he thought he had started talking too much. But in response, the white-haired lady smiled and said that everything was completely wrong and she wanted to hear his whole story. Only then did the man take a cup of coffee in his hands and with a smile told the heroine that it was not worth changing the recipe just for his sake, because it was already excellent, and he told everyone such a story for the sake of getting to know each other. But even after the meeting with the nice gardener ended and Loanna found herself alone in her own room, sitting at her desk and feeling bored, thinking about Ness's words about how her coffee recipe was too perfect. The girl realized that with a coffee machine, the taste of her coffee would become even more perfect and ideal, which is why the lady literally grabbed her head, wondering whether she needed to boil milk or coffee with ginger, make a caramel macchiato in order to no longer make excellent coffee. And when the girl realized that she, on the contrary, needed to work more actively, she suddenly stood up from her seat and joyfully realized that she had one idea. Because you can sit with imperfect grains, not process them, or make them taste imperfect. It was in this mood that the lady decided to meet with the wizard, with whom she was already sitting in the gazebo and drinking delicious coffee, telling him that now she needed to create a copper cauldron, and the wizard was only surprised by this. Even when the main character gave the wizard a piece of paper with a detailed description of the necessary machine and diagrams, the red-haired guy looked at it with curiosity and surprise, saying that the cauldron is a pretty funny invention. Then the guy decided to look at the main character with cunning and blush, saying that he would agree to this only if the girl shared some aromatic coffee with him. But Loanna willingly agreed. And after they both sat on the terrace and drank coffee, and the wizard stood up getting ready to say goodbye, he informed the heroine that the invention was quite simple, and therefore she could pick it up tomorrow morning, which the girl was happy about, and said that she would look forward to it. But for the main character, this was not all, because as soon as she finished an important meeting with the wizard Nerold, she decided to appear in the kitchen, which made the red-bearded cook happy, meeting the lady with a smile. He was, as always, glad to see a kind girl in his workspace. So he smiled, asking the lady what brought her here again, and he did not expect at all that this time the heroine would have a personal request for him. He was very surprised when the blonde approached him with delight and said that she wanted to ask him for something, because of which the man with red hair even moved away from her and asked in shock what she meant when the lady said that she needed help preparing dessert and she couldn't think of anyone to ask for it except him. The cook really liked this request, and he took the piece of paper with detailed descriptions from the heroine with a smile, saying with a grin that it was the first time he saw such a dessert with strange ingredients. But he would try to help her. After that, the red-haired cook said that of course he could carry out his plan, which made Loanna even happier, saying that she would need the sweetness in 3 days if the man could recreate it in that amount of time. Having agreed with the cook and also asked him for a bottle of the best liqueur that was in the kitchen, the girl decided to go to her chambers and gather the gardener with Hardwin, handing him that very bottle to Ness, who was surprised by the gift, and the lady said that she had brought it for him. But while the gardener was surprised by the good gift from the main character, the girl herself looked away because she noticed Edward and the guard, who were behaving rather strangely and only looking down, repenting, shaking from something. The girl looked at them and understood that perhaps they were tense because of the presence of the gardener, and therefore even shaking. And Nell was also looking at them, watching as Edward drank a cup of coffee with a trembling hand. The heroine, who felt a dark, awkward atmosphere above her because of the obvious fear of the guys, thought about the fact that Edward and the guard clearly began to behave strangely after the appearance of this man, which means it is not difficult to guess that the gardener is not as simple as he seems at first glance. This was the conclusion the lady made as the white-haired old man slowly sipped liqueur from a glass so relaxed and calm as if he did not feel the tension around him. After some time, the heroine had to say goodbye to the gardener, and at the moment when he was already leaving her room on his business, the blonde decided to stop him, which is why the old man with a bandage on his face turned around. And the gardener was greatly surprised by the fact that the girl in front of him was still joyful and cheerful, with which she asked Ness to return to visit her again in 3 days. And this surprised the old man, who asked why the lady wanted that. As it turned out, the determined girl invited the old man in order to treat him again to her coffee, improved and probably remade especially for him. But she did not tell the gardener this, only saying that she would be happy to treat him to coffee again. But even when the old man with an ambiguous grin on his face and sly eyes told the lady that his opinion of her drink would not change even after a repeat visit, the lady still smiled at him and said not to be upset about it, because she just wanted to treat him again. And when the puzzled old man said that in that case he would be very pleased to receive an invitation from her, The blonde was even more delighted, realizing that she was already finding fans for her culinary creativity. However, after the gardener left and said that they would see each other again in 3 days, the maid Issa approached the heroine and asked the lady what kind of coffee she was going to make, which slightly surprised the lady with pink eyes. It turns out that the maid meant that she didn't hope at all that the gardener would appreciate her coffee and like it, and she told Loana. But she only smiled, understanding that Issa was simply worried about her as a friend. In order to calm the maid down, the blonde decided not only to give her her smile, but also to say with an upbeat mood that everything would be fine, and she was 100% sure of it, because even now she had a desire to make coffee tastier and better for everyone. The heroine spent the entire afternoon collecting coffee beans in the garden, and by evening the girl already had a lot of beans, which she roasted until golden, but not completely ready, which is why Issa, watching the roasting machine work, asked if she really would not roast them to the end. The blonde cheerfully told Isa that today she would only lightly roast the beans, which surprised the maid, who had never thought about the fact that beans could be roasted using different technologies. And after the girls said goodbye with the words that they already needed to go to bed, because tomorrow they would have to get up early to come to the wizard, who would give them a brand new copper cauldron, it became dark in the corridor, and even the light from the wall lamps gradually went out. But for one maid, the end of the day did not mean the end of all work, because Inga was already walking quickly through the dark Oriel and was angry at the candlesticks that she had to deal with because of her mistress. The thing is, earlier the blonde brought her a chest with rusty candlesticks, and therefore asked the maid to clean them until they shine. And Inga, who only remembered this moment, was already gritting her teeth in rage and anger at the aristocrat along the corridor. But that evening, when not a single light was on in the window of the luxurious palace, and Inga still could not sleep, walking around the building, she thought about how, despite all this, she had managed to collect dirt on Loana, and would soon tell everything to the head maid. And Inga wanted to tell all this right now, so she had already appeared in the right room, where she had agreed to meet the head maid, joyfully calling her, because she had good news for both of them. When the head maid heard from her charge that she had found evidence that Loana was practicing black magic, the maid was surprised and immediately asked her friends if this was true. The head maid was immediately delighted by such news and approached Inga with a smile, asking what kind of black magic Loana was using. And the lady with green hair replied that the gentlemen were using some kind of black powder that degraded all forms of life. The senior maid was even more surprised when Inga said with a serious face that she herself had seen the girl throwing out this powder earlier, and intended to tell her friend right now. The girl said that she not only saw the lady throwing out the powder, but she also did it in the dark together with Isa, who was sitting and doing it while the suspicious Loana was looking at her. And all this happened in the priceless garden of the Grand Duchess, which everyone likes and is considered a landmark. Hearing this, the head maid began to laugh madly and say that black powder is an integral part of black magic, and she is already sure that they were able to notice Loana's dark side, her bad intentions and secrets. And also, when they were both laughing and talking about how if they told Duke Klaus about this, he would definitely kick Loana out of the palace, the head maid continued to smile and order Inga to prepare for a new important task. And while the maids already wanted to show everyone Loana Jacob from the other, more evil side as soon as possible, a lot of time had already passed, and 3 days later, the gardener and Hardwin came to Loana, who wanted to try the girl's new coffee. And Ratnoitskaya was only happy about this because she was preparing a surprise for them. But the old man paid attention not only to the girl and what she was doing, but also to the new strange object, which he looked at with his green eye, asking the heroine what it was. The old man said that he had never seen such a strange pot with a long handle, and the lady replied that it was a special device called a Turk, and that it was needed to make Turkish coffee in a country that they had most likely never heard of. The gardener looked with interest at the device, which turned out to be from lands that were previously unknown to him, asking the heroine what this Turkish coffee was and how to prepare it using such a pot. And the main character, in a beautiful, snow-white outfit with long sleeves and a stylish collar, just boldly picked up the pot and said that right now she would show them a master class on how to make Turkish coffee. The first thing the lady told me was that the drink was made by boiling coffee grounds in water, and that this was a very ancient brewing method that was used before coffee machines. And the girl also added 1 spoon of lightly roasted beans to the boring dish. The girl thought about how the coffee turns out to be uneven, but this is exactly what the traditional recipe looks like, making the taste unique. So she poured the beans into the grinder with a smile on her face and heated them. But in this, the girl saw not only joy, but also more diligent work. So she looked at her own machine with seriousness, thinking about how she would have to grind the grains as best as possible. Because if this was not done, a grain could get into the mouth and injure, for example, the tongue, the palate, and the heroine managed to do what she had planned, because the grains were ground into powder, which she poured into a pot that already contained water. And everyone around watched this process with curiosity. And while the old man with the bandage on his eye was very surprised that the girl was heating everything together to boiling point at the same time, the heroine calmly went about her business, because she was helped in this by a magic plate with adjustable heating level, which her wizard had made. She was extremely serious about her work and therefore did not even smile, was not distracted by the words of the spectators around her, understood that it was absolutely impossible for her to digest coffee. Therefore, she decided to lower the temperature. The girl knew that as soon as the liquid began to boil, she had to immediately remove the Turk from the fire and wait until bubbles appeared, and the lady repeated this several times, as a result of which steam began to come out of the pot, and coffee foam rose to the top. This is exactly what the main character did, who watched the first result with a smile, understood that this is how one should wish, and she also remembered that in the original coffee recipe they add sugar, which the lady was already preparing to include in her recipe. But the heroine was going to use not simple sugar, but special candies of different colors, which are called Turkish Delight, and which were also first created in Turkey. And the girl had such a sweet at hand for the reason that she had previously asked the cook to prepare it according to her own recipe. Thanks to the efforts of the woman and also the efforts of the cook who prepared Turkish Delight for the lady, on the table in her chambers there were already not only 4 cups of Turkish coffee, but also sweets, which were certainly pleasant to eat in contrast to the rich, bitter coffee. All those present, including the maid Isa, the satric Nez, and Hardwin, sat down on the sofas and already wanted to try a new miracle from the protagonist, who before the meal recommended that they first take a sip of coffee and then try the sweets on the saucer. The gardener was very surprised by the heroine's coffee, which seemed to be the same as last time. But for Ness, everything was different, because when he peered into the cup of hot drink, he already noticed that it was more like syrup, and even when he tried it, he realized that although the coffee smelled bitter, in fact, it turned out to be light and soft. The old man realized that this was not just any coffee, but something unusual and beautiful. Only the main heroine had corrected him, so he immediately decided to confess to everyone that he was now enchanted by the freshness and taste of this drink, which surprised the blonde, and that's why she looked at him with defeat. And while Loanna was rejoicing and understanding that she seemed to have already managed to indulge the gardener's joy, Nam himself looked with a smile and delight at the cup of coffee in his hands and said that he liked this much better, because the nutty notes in the taste had faded into the background and now he felt an incredibly strong taste. He looked at the coffee with an inspired gami and continued to admit to everyone that the coffee grains already give the taste a unique, good taste, but he also wanted to try the sweetness that the protagonist had spoken about earlier. That's why he already held in his hands one piece of Turkish Delight, which he tried and admired even more, telling everyone that the taste of this candy was more interesting because it tasted like a rose, rich and sweet, which you want to try again and again. As a result, imagining a pot of delicious and aromatic coffee, which flows out of it and also lifts candies into the air, the old man said that this is exactly how he sees this drink with Turkish Delight, and therefore tells everyone that this is a very good drink. The main character realized that after so many compliments and words about her drink, she could try it herself, thanks to which she already took a cup of coffee in her hands, and after trying it, she smiled and said that it was really delicious. Hardwin spoke in exactly the same way about the main character's drink, looking at the cup of hot drink with bright, beautiful eyes and saying that he wasn't sure if he would drink it every day, but now he would definitely think about coffee and want to try it again. But the blonde also looked at the maid Isa, who seemed to be amazed and shocked by something, and grabbed her face, confessing to everyone that this sweetness would soon drive her crazy, which is why the smiling lady knew that it seemed like her friend also liked the Turkish Delight. The girl blushed from the endless compliments and looked slyly at everyone, realizing that now the situation with her drink had improved, but she still looked at the old man and asked him what assessment he would give to her creation now. The company sat pleasantly in the luxurious apartments of the main character with high windows, blue walls, and curtains, where it was comfortable and quiet. And the gardener, sighing, was about to tell the heroine his opinion and the truth. Having drunk all the Turkish coffee from the main character in 2 gulps, the man leaned back on the sofa with a smile and said to the girl with a smile, as if admitting to her that her coffee had made a great, pleasant impression on him, much better than last time. Although even then everything was not bad. The old man even admitted that the pieces of coffee that settled at the bottom of the cup reminded him of pieces of malt and thus caused him to feel nostalgia, a feeling that never changes, and he thanks the surprised lady for giving him the opportunity to feel it again. The girl also told the man that she was pleased to hear such a high assessment of her inventions, that she was doing him all the best, that she was continuing to invent new types of coffee and develop further, admitting this with a warm smile on her face. And after everyone had a friendly time in the main character's chambers, tasted coffee, and were about to leave, the gardener stood in front of Loanna and with a smile asked her to invite him further into the house, because he still had a great desire to try her coffee. This made the girl so happy that she grabbed his hands and looked at him with an equally joyful smile and enthusiasm, saying that of course she invites him to the palace and further, if the gardener so wants to visit her and get acquainted with new tastes of coffee. At parting, she said that she would wait for his arrival with surprise, and on such a wonderful note everyone said goodbye. After which, the heroine decided to sit down with a satisfied smile and think about how she had managed to get compliments and praise from Ness. But when the girl wanted to open the book for the umpteenth time that day and start reading one of the novels, Issa immediately came up to her and snatched the book from her hands with such force that the blonde was silently amazed. But they didn't even have time to laugh because they heard loud knocks on the door. Izu was incredibly surprised that those who stood behind the door and knocked on it introduced themselves as people from the main castle, which at the same time frightened the maid, and she thought that something serious was waiting for her and the mistress, and not a simple conversation with the maid or other servants. With the same fear and confusion, she turned to the mistress and asked what they should do now. But the protagonist was not as scared as she was, so she curiously asked the maid who was standing there. The girl told the heroine that behind this door, judging by the head, is Sir Lambert, who is known for his unpleasantness and severity, because he is the acting consul of Hiroga, that is, the one who represents the interests of Klaus. The blonde immediately thought about it and realized that Lambert was perhaps one of those people who brought her here, and so the girl assumed that she would be able to find a common language with him, but the lady's hopes turned out to be not entirely true. The girl confessed to Isa that she didn't think that Lambert and Klaus were very close, even though they worked together, and that's why she already wanted to talk to him and find out everything that he wanted to find out from her. And for this, she opened her doors a little to go to meet the guest. The lady also thought along the way about how power in the current duchy was split into two parts, one of which supported the emperor, and the other the prince, which is why the lady imagined the state coat of arms with the image of a unicorn and a shiny sword. The lady also recalled how on the eve of the wedding she held a bright bouquet of purple flowers in her hands, remembering that the very same consul Lambert wanted to marry her off to Klaus in order to influence her father and convert him to the right side. But when the consul learned that Louis's family had sent in marriage not their beloved daughter, but Loanna, who turned out to be of no use to anyone even in a wedding dress, Lambert refused to recognize her as the true duchess and to have anything to do with her at all. And he hated the girl. And now the blonde with pink eyes does not understand why the consul needed to meet with her, because recently she has not done anything terrible and has not spoken out too categorically about anything, but is simply going about her business. Imagine her surprise when she opened the door and saw in front of her not only the consul, but also Inga with cunning eyes, who was standing behind the man. She was clearly not there just like that, as if she was in the same company with Lambert. It was also a real shock for her when the indignant consul in front of her looked at her with real anger and asked the maid Inga whether this lady was supposedly engaged in black magic and scattering strange powders. And when Inga answered that it was all the pure truth, and she herself saw it with her own eyes, which made the blonde even more angry, realizing that they wanted to accuse her of something, and that not only the consul was involved in this, but also the maid, who had been working as a spy all this time. Everything immediately got mixed up in her head, and for a second the lady tried to remember where she had gone wrong and done something wrong. But when everything in her eyes became even more incomprehensible, she grabbed her head and asked everyone to explain everything. She also looked at each of them and asked why they didn't introduce themselves and only then make some claims, rather than appear in front of her room and demand incomprehensible explanations and the truth. The red-haired Lambert was so outraged by this that he looked at the protagonist with no less indignation and asked what right she had to talk to him like that, and even more so to demand that from him. And while the consul was trying to understand with fury why the girl in front of him was correcting him and how she dared to do it, they looked at each other with anger and distrust, And the guy with red hair even thought that the blonde in front of him was an ordinary mudblood who was pretending to be an important person. But the heroine was not so angry towards the guest because she did not even intend to humiliate or anger him. So she simply sighed tiredly and asked again why he had come and what their names were. What was the reason for their visit? The red-haired guy was still angry with the heroine from the very beginning. So he looked at her with displeasure, as if she was a guilty maid in front of him, and not a duchess. But he knew everything. He had to introduce himself, so the blonde understood who was standing in front of her. Imagining a shining cross, the guy said that he was a member of the Templar Order, who protect the duchy from witches and evil, and that is why he came to her not only to accuse her of black magic, but also to prove its presence. Introducing himself to the heroine by the name Lambert, the red-haired man said that he had previously been informed that black magic seemed to be practiced here, and had come here to see for himself. The blonde was so surprised by this, she looked at him with genuine shock and surprise, even forgetting about the gift of speech. Behind her, the maid Isa was no less surprised. She looked at the consul with big eyes and asked if this was really so, because she was hearing something like this for the first time. The lady watched in defeat as the consul first asked the cunning Inga to tell her what she had seen. And the girl with green hair was already smiling, beginning her story by saying that she had seen it 4 days ago. As Inga said, she was walking down the stairs with a smile on her face and in high spirits, getting ready to go for a walk outside after completing the work that the Duchess, that is, Loanna, had previously given her. Inga also said that it happened that way, and the Duchess wanted to take a walk. And that's why the girl wanted, in her words, to give the lady a snack. But she stopped when she noticed that the blonde was standing near the tree with Isa, and they were both doing something strange, getting Neo out of the ground. She finished her story by saying that she saw the girls sprinkle some black powder on the ground, and after that, the consul slyly put his hands on his hips and looked at the heroine with a grin, saying that she better not deny all this, because there are even witnesses to this incident. Shocked by such statements, the girl sighed again and became angry, but tried to contain all the indignation and anger in herself, lowering her head and saying with her eyes closed that this was not black powder or poison at all, but something completely different. The girl confessed that this black and incomprehensible thing for everyone was just fertilizer from coffee beans for plants. But when she said this, the consul and Inga still did not calm down, asking the blonde if this was true with bewilderment. The guy asked the lady how it was possible that some grains turned into fertilizer, and as soon as the heroine tried to explain it to everyone, the red-haired guy shouted that it didn't matter to him, because Inga had said it straight out that she had sprinkled black powder in the garden. The lady with white hair and pink eyes became even more angry and realized that it was impossible to talk to this person. So she decided to indignantly ask what evidence they had that she was using black magic and for what purpose. In response, Lambert only smiled slyly and looked down on the girl, saying that she was behaving too brazenly and narcissistically, although the girl had previously only asked to show evidence and not to accuse her based on Inga's word alone. And when the blonde got even more angry, looking at the consul with extreme indignation and asking him if he really considered her supposedly impudent, Lambert only said again with a smile that everything was so, because she wanted to see material evidence. The red-haired guy was very shocked by the fact that the girl started yelling at him and getting indignant, saying that she was behaving really naively and stupidly if she relied only on the words of some maid. And the guy was surprised by such behavior, opening his lips and realizing that in front of him was not at all a fragile lady, as he had previously assumed and who was easy to intimidate. Loanna said again that if they didn't have proof, she wouldn't even listen to them or talk to them. And only this made the consul look at Inga with displeasure and ask if she was sure of what she saw. And the lady with green, short hair, for greater credibility, put her hand on her cleavage and said that she always tells him only the truth, and also said that he himself promised to support her, so she wants this support now. But the consul remained dissatisfied and very angry, and therefore looked at Inga with furious galmi, ordering her to immediately take him to the place where exactly she saw Loanna with the black powder, if they still needed evidence. That's why they decided to go together to the place where the main character and the maid Isa were supposedly engaged in black magic, and Inga went first, who was supposed to show everyone the surrounding evidence. And while the confident and dissatisfied consul followed her, Blanca and Isa went last. The girl with green hair was angry, but sold it further, not understanding what had happened to the consul and why he was so angry with her. Because now Lambert was showing his discontent and aristocratic pride. After all, Inga remembered very well that earlier the consul had thought and talked about how now was a wonderful moment for them to get rid of Loanna and bring a new, worthy duchess into the house. And for Loanna's family, this would be a good lesson and warning. But the girl with green hair and bad intentions and a sly smile knew that the black powder was still there. And when she brought everyone to the right place and showed it, on Hemla, between the trees, there really was something black scattered, and Inga talked about it, but there is. Having seen everything he needed with his own eyes, the red-haired guy smiled slyly and laughed, saying, "Oh, this is exactly what they were talking about." But Loanna behind him looked curiously at the black mixture on the ground and understood. Oh, everything was completely wrong. And when the consul asked Loanna, "Oh, this," the girl answered discontentedly, "Oh, this does not prove anything." And when the disgruntled guy with red hair asked the girl why she thought so, Loanna decided to immediately take a handful of black powder, which everyone was so afraid of and thought was dark magic, in order to prove otherwise. With black powder in her hands, the blonde looked at everyone and said that she had heard about black magic before and knew that black powder absorbs the energy of all living things, and that it died. But that was not the case. And when the red-haired guy looked at the protagonist with shock, as if there was a crazy woman in front of him, who even picked up something strange, Loanna said that this powder still tasted sweet. But everyone still did not understand what the girl was leading to and was trying to show. The consul was even more outraged by the fact that the blonde was not afraid to extend her hand with the black mixture to him, asking to taste the strange powder. And the guy even shuddered, amazed at the heroine's supposed impudence. He clenched his teeth in anger and asked the girl if she really wanted him to try her strange powder, previously unknown to anyone. And after that, he said, "Let her try it herself." The consul, with a grin and malice, asked the girl to try the strange powder from the ground, if she herself said that it was sweet, and the blonde did not even refuse this, saying that otherwise they would have to apologize to her. Hearing this, the consul got furious and started shouting, saying how could she offer him some powder if he could get poisoned? But the heroine answered, saying that the ass here is very small and it won't do any harm, also asking why he couldn't do such a trifle for the sake of investigation and truth. And from this, the dissatisfied guy gritted his teeth. The guy got even more furious, like a thundercloud that only gets stronger. He started waving his hands in front of the lady and saying that it was all pointless and that the presence of black powder was enough to accuse her of something. But Loanna remained calm. At that moment, the blonde, who was alone, doubted her actions for a moment, realizing that the consul was not at all interested in the investigation and simply wanted to accuse her of something terrible. But the girl also wanted to get her way. However, the lady did not expect that at all. But at that very moment, when the blonde was thinking that she would once again have to prove something to someone who no longer wanted to listen to her, she heard a dissatisfied male voice behind her, asking everyone what was going on here. The lady was even more amazed when she turned around and saw a tall, arrogant gardener with a bandage over his eye, who was smiling at the heroine and was already taking her side, intending to defend her opinion against the consul, who in everyone's eyes looked like a good man and reliable, although everything was not so. The girl, who for a moment was upset because she compared the intentions of others to frame her with the fact that Klaus himself wanted to get rid of her, looked at Ness in surprise and understood that he was the one who would prove her innocence to everyone. And when the blonde just wanted to stretch out her hand to ask him for help, believing that everyone would believe the gardener, the girl did not expect that the consul would bow to him as low as possible right in front of Ness, and call, it would seem, some gardener by name. Seeing such a shocking picture, she looked at everything with pink eyes and beads of sweat on her face from anxiety, not understanding why the consul was worshipping some gardener. But when she heard his last name, Ignace, she seemed to understand something. The thing is, in front of him was not an ordinary gardener without one eye, but the handsome and white-haired grandfather of Duke Klaus and the former owner of this house, Ignace von Bruggen, who in fact dresses not in simple clothes, but in royal brown clothes. Many years ago, when the old man was still an aristocrat in luxurious clothes, he gave up his post to his son-in-law, who married his beautiful pink-haired daughter, and after that he retired and began to earn extra money by doing what he loved, that is, gardening. Now, as it turned out, in front of her was not just a gardener in cute green clothes and with an eye patch, but a real aristocrat, who in his years ruled this castle and therefore should be treated with even more respect than before, although the heroine already considered him a good, sweet friend. She looked at him with admiration and surprise at the same time when the sunlight fell on her, And she was also surprised, because she remembered that Hardwin had treated Ness with respect from the very beginning, and in his presence the consul bowed. That's why in the lady's eyes the gardener seemed even more handsome and noble, even though he was simply standing with his hands hidden behind his back, looking at Lambert, who already wanted to be indignant at him and speak out about the main character and her black powder. And to do this, he pointed his hand, his index finger, at the defenseless lady with bright fury, shouting as loudly as he could, "Oh, this lady is ruining their precious garden of the Grand Duchess with her strange, possibly deadly powder." Then the lady decided to look at the garden with beautiful flowers, tall trees, and lush bushes, realizing that earlier this garden was looked after by Nez's daughter, the Grand Duchess. And for this reason, Nez became a gardener, wanting to always keep his daughter's garden beautiful. Loanna understood that she didn't need to be scared, but needed to tell everything as it was. So she raised her head with determination and said that she didn't use some black powder. Everyone looked at the same black mixture that was scattered on the grass and between the trees in the garden. Loanna said that if you try it, you can understand that the powder is bitter, not sweet, because it is not poison, but ground coffee. But the consul still shouted at the gardener to take his word for it, because in front of them was an ordinary blonde madwoman. The red-haired guy was already sure that Ness would listen to him and punish the heroine, so he gesticulated furiously with his hands and said that everyone should believe him, because this is the garden of the Grand Duchess, which is important to everyone, and the blonde treats him so disrespectfully, scattering something strange. Then the lady looked at Nez with uncertainty and realized that the garden was really very important to him, and now she needed to prepare for him to scold and punish her. But for now, the former duke was silent, thinking about what was happening. She was struck by the fact that the gardener was very kind to her, as always, because he smiled warmly, while the blonde looked at Nez with surprise and guessed what would happen next. But no one expected that the old man, kind and shy to everyone, would suddenly hang over the consul and ask him in a stern, displeased voice how he dared to call his daughter-in-law just some woman, and even call her a false duchess, as if she were nobody here. The red-haired boy was so shocked, he looked at the tall man in front of him with silent shock and parted lips, asking the former aristocrat what he meant, while chills and goosebumps ran through his body. Only when the old man shouted at him and firmly said that the Duchess Loanna was in front of him now, and that she must be treated appropriately, the consul instantly turned red, began to tremble and almost burst into tears, apologized to the Duchess in a frightened voice, and for the first time addressed her respectfully. Inga with green hair also apologized to the heroine, which is why the consul and she bowed low before the protagonist and the gardener, once again asking for an apology, when Loanna knew that if it weren't for Ness, everything could have ended sadly for her. Only after this did the old man smile slyly and decide to talk about that very powder that had brought them all together, asking everyone if it was because of it that the consul had put all his work aside and started yelling at the innocent Loanna, as if she had created a huge problem for everyone. The consul believed for a moment that everyone around him would believe him, and so he enthusiastically showed the old man the black powder that had been scattered right under the tree trunk, saying that this was it. The red-haired guy even decided to take the black mixture in his hands and show it to the gardener with the hope that he would change his mind. But everything turned out to be wrong, because the white-haired gentleman calmly said that this was definitely not black magic, because he knew what it really was. The blonde was inspired when Nez confirmed her words and therefore decided to tell everyone with a smile that this was not magic at all, but crushed coffee beans, which serve as a good fertilizer for plants with the necessary nutrients. The girl also remembered that in her past life she worked in a coffee shop, often grinding coffee beans into powder and selling it in light bags as a flavoring agent for free, so people could enjoy the aroma of coffee. And when the red-haired consul, frightened by the situation and the old man, wanted to apologize for everything and say goodbye, saying that it was all a misunderstanding, Ness only loomed over him menacingly, threatening that it was not all, and that he would still answer for his insolence. The green-haired maid, who had hoped that the consul would support her and cover for her, looked at him in shock as Lambert pointed his finger at her with complete confidence and said that it was all her fault, because she had brought him here and accused the Duchess. She immediately got angry at her partner and was indignant, saying what right did he have to talk to her? And the red-haired guy clenched his teeth in anger, because he wanted to look kind and innocent in everyone's eyes. Lambert still had to hang his head in shame and remain silent when Ness said that, of course, the maid could have provoked this situation, but it still meant that the consul was still obliged to bear responsibility for his actions, because he put Loanna in a difficult position. But he was even more amazed at the moment when the old man sternly told the guy that he would be under constant surveillance for the next 2 months. And as an apology, the old man ordered him to send the Templar seal to Loanna. At that moment, the girl realized that the same red seal with a silver cross, realizing that the Templar seal testifies to small plots of land that can remain with him even after retirement. But now Lambert can lose them too. The red-haired guy immediately became indignant and began to shout that this was unfair and very cruel. But the calm gardener in front of him said that the seal was also a symbol of honor, and a person who wanted to denigrate the Duchess could not be considered good and noble. But the green-haired girl got it even worse because the old man said that from that moment on she would be fired, which not only upset Inga, but also made her whole body tremble with fear, realizing that her attempts to do something for others had turned out to be bad for her. She began to tell the gardener with shaking hands that it was all unfair, and she was ready to tell the old man how everything had been on the jelly itself. But Ness only ordered her to shut up, because he had already made the necessary decisions. Only the main character noticed that. The girl seemed to want to say something, but she never managed to do it. But at that moment, the old man with gray hair and an eye patch turned to her in order to say something. The blonde hastened to thank the old man for his protection and help, but he only told her not to treat him so formally and politely, because now they would be close friends, coffee colleagues. In response, the heroine laughed and said that she didn't even know how to thank him. And after she asked him why he wanted to help her, the smiling old man said that it was all because she treated him to coffee, which really surprised the lady. The girl with large, curious eyes was silent and looked at him when the old man confessed that she helped him and told him about the delicacies even at the moment when she did not think about him, but about the Duke, and when she was sure about him, about an ordinary gardener. The old man said that the girl decided not to turn away from him even when he could be easily gotten rid of. But then the lady smiled sincerely and said that she just loves those moments when others enjoy her coffee and enjoy its taste. The former Duke also admitted that he also saw his dead daughter in the sweet main character, who was so joyful, graceful, and happy, sweet and kind to everyone, because all this the gardener can now see in the protagonist. This made the main character shut up and look at the old man with even greater surprise when he continued to speak, saying that he seemed to have already understood that the castle was very prejudiced against her, although in fact she was not doing anything bad. He continued to walk along the path with the lady with a slight smile and tell her that he also understood that they were trying to drive the heroine out of here, and that this was incredibly upsetting to him. But there was something else that he wanted to tell Loanna. Looking at those same red Adanta fruits that were growing on the branches, Nez said that he understood perfectly well that the girl was not going to ruin the garden, but was only collecting the fruits she needed for herself and wanted to improve the garden a little, so he was not so stupid as to believe some consul and a maid. These words made the main character so happy that she could almost cry with joy when Nez said that he would be on her side, but she was even more pleased when the striker said that she could always come to her if she wanted to talk. They both continued to walk around the garden and look at it, talk nicely, and the gardener also admitted that he couldn't choose favorites because of his age, but he wouldn't stand aside when the heroine needed help. And when the girl said goodbye to the old man, saying that now she wanted to meet him more often and drink a cup of coffee, a day later they brought her the long-awaited Templar seal in a beautiful box, saying that now it was her property. In addition to this, the girl was also presented with papers stating that the consul's land was now being transferred to the main character, along with all the documents and seals. And thanks to them, the heroine learned that the consul had previously been the owner of a store on Dalton Street. The blonde was even more surprised then when the red-haired man told her that Sir Lamert really wanted to open his own jewelry store and even rented a space for it for 10 years in advance. The girl understood that she would no longer have to pay rent for the premises, but when the subordinate asked the girl if she would use this store, the lady turned away from him and said that now was not the time to discuss this, which is why the servant understood that it was not worth getting involved in this. The servant hurried to inform the lady that in that case he would leave here, and after that the blonde looked at Isa as if she already wanted to tell her something, and the sweet maid smiled, guessing what idea would arise in her mistress's head. And while Loanna ordered her own Gorinchoi to take the seal to the storeroom, which the lady was already doing, there were many servants in the castle who were also doing their work, climbing the stairs, and at the same time they managed to discuss all the gossip and news of the palace. They all walked along the corridors in the required uniform and discussed the recent events related to the consul and Ness, like Sir Lambert tried to accuse Loanna of black magic and was reprimanded for it by Nez himself. And Inga, who participated in this, was also punished. But the most upset and saddened was the senior maid, who had shown Inga how to do everything, but now would regret the loss of a close friend, looked at everyone with tears, and said that all this was breaking her heart. And all this the girl, kneeling, told the stern Duke, who listened to her sad words, regret, and apologies. But the black-haired guy seemed to believe in the devotion of the senior maid and her emotions. However, when the aristocrat told her that he did not doubt her loyalty, but could not leave it alone because she had harmed his wife to some extent, the maid became angry and gritted her teeth in discontent, realizing that she would not be able to remain innocent. Even when the guy was clearly treating her with disdain, looking at the lady with folded hands and not going to change his mind, the head maid still sat on her knees in front of him and bowed, saying that Inga was a hard-working, responsible girl. The senior maid even asked the aristocrat how she could have known and assumed that Inga would do this. The red-eyed Duke replied that spying on the maids was her job, because she was responsible for selecting the servants. This further angered the head maid, who gritted her teeth and thought about how she was supposedly protecting the Duke from such a strange and dangerous lady as Loanna, who had even managed to get close to Hardwin during this time. The maid still wanted to stay in her position, and when the aristocrat in front of her said that he had no choice and he was obliged to remove her, the Duke became even more angry, saying that now he would have to keep records of expenses himself. And to this, the lady said that this was unacceptable, and he had so much work and he did not need to worry about such trifles. This angered the aristocrat so much that he looked at her with bright, furious eyes and asked if she considered the questions concerning her wife to be trivial, which caused goosebumps to run across the mountaineer's skin. The surprised and wary maid suddenly fell silent, not understanding why the Duke had recently become so worried about his wife and thinking about her. But in the end, she already understood that the aristocrat would not change his opinion. And after the Duke finished his conversation with the eldest mountain lady about her dismissal, Klaus calmly sat down at the snow-white writing desk and ordered the servant Edward to bring all the documents related to his wife. The subordinate did it in a few seconds, already holding the necessary folder in her hands and telling the aristocrat that all the information about expenses for the last 2 months was collected here, which needed to be seen. As soon as Klaus looked at them, he realized that the amount allocated for Loanna was excessively small. But even so, the girl did not spend anything. He just put the documents on the table and sighed. He realized that he needed to check everything himself, because only now he realized that his money was provided incompletely and clearly, not in the way he had previously ordered the servants. And while the Duke was getting ready to work, the blonde was also busy with her own affairs. But suddenly, the one she looked at with shock and curiosity burst into her room, because this man was very happy and encouraged by something. And this man turned out to be the long-haired Gerald, who was smiling and blushing because of something that interested Gurnia even more, which is why she asked what brought him here. But then she remembered what exactly she had asked him about days earlier. The lady guessed that perhaps the wizard had managed to create a coffee machine. She asked if she was thinking correctly, and in response, the wizard smiled and said that everything was so. He was ready to provide her with his new invention. And after some time, in front of the pro-atnoit, there really was a large box covered with a red cloth, which the sorcerer already wanted to tear off, saying with a satisfied smile that the car was located just under this cloth. As soon as the guy tore off the fabric, the surprised and inspired girl noticed a beautiful and functional coffee machine with the necessary buttons and devices for tamping, grinding coffee, and also burning milk for latte. But there was also something in this machine that the wizard really wanted to show to the lady, so he told her to look at one corner of the coffee machine, where Lay noticed with charm the name of the machine. That is, Geralo, which Gerald bragged about and was happy about. The blonde smiled when the guy with long hair happily told that he created such a name because he put their names together and got Geralo. And this made the lady look at the coffee machine with interest. And only after the guy told everything he needed, he happily raised his hand and told the lady to immediately make him an espresso with the help of this miracle machine. And the lady was only glad to try the coffee machine in action. Having first asked Isa to bring the beans, the girl has already picked up a bag of dried beans and is pouring them into the right container in order to make the freshest coffee possible to drink. Just by turning on the button on the coffee machine, the girl managed to grind all the beans into a brown, aromatic powder the first time and very well, which poured into the holder. A special thing that looks like a filter holder with a handle. And after the heroine managed to tamp the coffee powder, she inserted the filter holder into the group with a smile, and the coffee machine itself began to turn the powder into coffee, and the hot drink immediately flowed into the cup. 3 minutes later, the main character was already smiling as she watched a thin stream of coffee flow straight into a white cup and fill the room with the aroma of nuts, roasted beans, and something bitter that beckoned everyone. But this was only the beginning for Gurney, because the blonde continued to prepare milk with a smile, because she poured it from the kettle into a container for heating and was already preparing to turn ordinary milk into foam. She managed to stir the milk and give it a unique, slightly modified vanilla color, but she continued to stir, then evenly add the milk to the still hot, aromatic coffee. A few minutes later, the girl had already added milk to her coffee and realized that she had just made the same cappuccino that she had often made in her previous life in her favorite cafe, and the wizard was only too happy to try it. She managed to make not just 1 cup, but 3, and not only the sorcerer, but also Issa tried this amazing drink, and the lady herself could try cappuccino and hear important opinions from others. The maid immediately picked up a cup of cappuccino and her eyes seemed to sparkle because she looked at the hot drink with enthusiasm, saying that it was incredibly beautiful and the milk looked very soft and attractive. The blonde told everyone with a smile that this milk is called mocha foam, and after that, Issa became even more interested in the drink, telling them that it looks very airy and she even really likes the look of it. And while the ladies were telling Isa that next time she would decorate the drink with a pattern of milk foam, the wizard already wanted to try the cappuccino. But before that, he looked at the miracle from the protagonist and asked her if it was already possible to drink, which surprised the white-haired lady. Loanna said that they could already drink, and this time there were no rituals before drinking, and as soon as everyone took a sip of cappuccino, immediately after that, milk foam appeared on the girl's upper lip, more like a mustache, which amazed everyone. Exactly the same mustache appeared on the wizard's face, who realized with surprise that he now looked the same as Issa. And the ladies watching this were already holding back their laughter, looking at their friends. Everyone in the company began to laugh sweetly and say to each other that now they all had mustaches made of milk foam, and the blonde laughed no less, getting ready to try her cappuccino in order to make herself exactly the same mustache. She managed to carry out her plan the first time, and the lady was very pleased with this. She smiled and sometimes laughed, thinking about how she felt like she had swallowed an abacco filled with sunlight. She imagined the caramel and whole coffee beans swirling together, realizing how rich and full the taste was, how strong the coffee tasted, the caramel notes that came from the roasting process. The girl also remembered the black and white cows that grazed on a green lawn under a blue sky, sweetly thinking about how in this world the milk was much fresher than in her past life, and because of this the taste was much richer. And as expected, the wizard incredibly liked the taste. He smiled and said that it was simply incredible, and he did not even suspect how he lived all this time without such a wonderful drink, which only makes him blush and enjoy it further. The blonde, pleased with these words, decided to stand up and tell everyone that she would now pour them espresso before leaving, so they could warm it up and drink it with milk before leaving. And Issa and Gerald thanked the lady for her concern, and so passed a calm, happy day for everyone. When Loanna first got a coffee machine and tested it, treating everyone to coffee, and even 2 days later, the girl, in a Soviet dress, did not leave the sorcerer's invention and looked at it. She asked Issa to bring milk for cappuccino, but the Goenka seemed not to want to immediately follow the mistress's order. So she stopped in front of her and wanted to tell her something important, namely that the milk had run out, because Sir Gerald drinks an incredible amount of coffee during the days. As soon as the heroine heard such a shocking piece of news, she clenched her teeth in shock and suddenly realized that this could have a very bad effect on the health of a coffee lover, because excessive consumption leads to terrible insomnia, nervousness, and heart problems. The blonde realized that she needed to stop Gerald immediately, and with such thoughts, she already appeared in front of the surprised Gerald, having taken with her a dark drink with pieces of ice, which Lay had asked Issa for earlier. Seeing that the heroine put a 100-year-old glass with a dark liquid and several pieces of ice in front of him, the red-haired guy looked at it with interest and asked the girl about it, and then the blonde began to tell, like she already knows, that he used up all the milk and that's why she brought him this. Also, looking at the attractive drink with coffee and pieces of ice, which even looked strange to the wizard, the girl said that it was coffee called Americano. That is, regular coffee with the addition of water in the form of ice cubes, to which 2 shots of espresso were added. As soon as the wizard tried such an unusual drink, after 1 sip, saliva immediately started flowing from his mouth, and he looked at the glass of Americano with bright eyes, saying, "Oh, this is much nicer. It must be because of the water." But when the guy in front of her enthusiastically asked the girl to make her an Americano with 3 or even 5 shots, The main character realized with indignation on her face that this was becoming dangerous and that one could even die from such a quantity of Americano. And so, when the lady sternly told the wizard that from now on she must limit his coffee consumption and that he would now drink only 1 cup of coffee a day, the guy was indignant, saying, "How is this possible?" After this, the wizard had to go to his tower and sadly understand that now he will not be able to enjoy coffee every day, because the heroine has already made a strict restriction for him, greatly fearing for the guy's health. Meanwhile, the red-haired cook who constantly works in the Duke's palace was already examining the cup with the drink from Loanna and cheerfully said whether this was the very interesting drink that the lady had prepared herself. The chef was thinking about whether he wanted to share this amazing drink with everyone, because he had already drunk enough coffee. And at that very moment, the assistant cooks entered his room and began to examine the jars of coffee with surprise, realizing that this was precisely the magic drink from Loanna. And the uncertain cooks, who treated coffee with disdain, having never tried anything like it before, nevertheless brought cups of coffee to their lips, intending to get acquainted with this miracle. As soon as they tried at least 1 sip of coffee, after a while, everyone immediately perked up. Even through laziness, they began to speak cheerfully and pleasantly about the coffee, telling each other that thanks to such a magical tip from Loanna, one was even able to play with the children after work, and others were cheerful and hardworking. Even now, they hold a box of wine in their hands and do not get tired. The main character was also happy about this. She was completely satisfied with her work and therefore sat at the table with a smile and enjoyed the silence, holding a cup of coffee in her hands and thinking about how happiness looks like for her. But her peaceful rest was interrupted by a wizard who came to her quite suddenly and asked the girl if she had heard the latest news, which caused the lady to look at him and ask what he meant. As soon as the herald informed the lady that the prince himself was going to inform her, the lady immediately imagined in her mind a man with long, light hair and in luxurious, dark clothing. The wizard sat down with the aristocrat at a table on the lovely, snow-white terrace, while Loanna continued to ask the sorcerer why the most important person in the empire and duchy was going to come to her. The lady with pink eyes told the guy that most likely the prince wanted to visit not her, but Duke Klaus, to which the wizard replied that everything was possible, because he used to come to him every year. Remembering Prince Hendrik, because of whom Klaus never took the emperor's side, she imagined Klaus and the prince behind him, thinking also about how the Duke was Hendrik's closest ally. Having imagined a golden crown with luxurious stones, the girl also remembered that the prince always tried hard to do everything for the empire. But in the end, he was never appointed crown prince, the true heir to power. And now, when the gentlemen in the garden are thinking about the fact that the prince eventually became against the imperial power, because all his requests for conquest of the throne were rejected, and now all the aristocrats are divided into camps, who is for and who is against, and the tension in aristocratic circles is only growing. Even when the wizard asked the lady if she was worried about being drawn into political affairs, the calm lady with white hair replied that everyone considered her just a mongrel in someone's hands and believed that the prince would not even be interested in her. The wizard was still clearly worried about the main character and therefore asked her further, saying that the prince could still make a couple of claims against her. But even to this, the lady calmly answered that everything would be fine. She just took a cup of coffee in her hands and with a smile said to the sorcerer, "She doesn't worry about it for the reason that she already knows. She won't get out of her room until the moment when the prince leaves, so as not to disturb anyone." And when the girl was already thinking about how she would use this time to immerse herself more in books, time passed, and the very day came when the prince appeared at the Duke's estate, when the warm wind fluttered his long golden hair. Duke Klaus was already standing in front of the prince and bowed to him as low as he could, to show his respect, telling the arriving guest that it was an honor for him to receive him into his castle, and that he was already ready to talk to him about work. The prince turned out to have green, bright eyes and a sly smile, looked at Klaus with pride and greeted the aristocrat, admitting that he was glad to meet him, especially since they had not seen each other for a long time. After they both went to the palace and occupied one room, the prince grabbed his head and said that he already wanted to, but he addressed him unofficially. And he also told Klaus right away that because of the political situation, he would have to send the Duke to the capital. They sat on snow-white sofas and talked in a large, quiet room. And the Duke also said that he suspected that this was connected with Duke Rilke. But the prince said that everything was really so, and this was an order from His Majesty. The Duke imagined the dancing couple and the blue butterfly as a symbol of tenderness when the prince explained in more detail that he would have to attend a summer night ball in the capital, where the emperor's retinue and other close associates would gather. The prince explained that it was possible that something like this would happen, that people would pretend that they had taken Klaus's side and would deprive the prince of their support, although that was not the case. But after that, Klaus also admitted that he had not been to that ball for a long time, since the last time he had attended it was with his parents in childhood. The prince with blonde hair began to look up thoughtfully and say that if the duke was worried, he could ask Duke Ness to look after the palace because the trip to the capital would take 2 months. But then an idea came to his mind. And when the duke angrily lowered his head and with furrowed brows began to listen to the prince, he asked his friend if he was really worried about his new wife, saying that in his absence she wanted to start something laughing. The prince also asked the angry guy if his wife's name was Beth or Elizabeth, and Klaus replied that it was not so, because Count Louis really does have a daughter, but it was not her. And after that, the circle did not want to reveal the details of his personal life. He remembered her sweet appearance and smile, realizing that he didn't want to talk about her family behind her back, also wondering why she hadn't left her chambers lately, and whether he really wanted to not disturb anyone with his presence. And from the deep thoughts of the guy, the words of the prince came to the conclusion that he remembered that the count had another daughter named Loanna, and he asked the duke if she was his wife. Only the name of Loanna, which was heard from the lips of the prince, made the duke seem to get angry and fall silent, bow his head lower, addressing him with disdain, as if the aristocrat was saying something different from what the prince had asked his friend. As it turned out, the guy with a broad back and black and white robes admitted that he didn't even want to discuss his wife for special reasons. And the prince, looking at him with curiosity, realized that this was not like Klaus, and he had never been like this before. The prince told the guy that, of course, he didn't want to touch on topics that were of concern to him, but he also warned him that Klaus wouldn't be able to hide Loanna from him, because the summer ball was an event for couples, where he was supposed to appear with his wife. And after the shocked duke found out about this, the surprised main character was already in front of a servant who informed her that she had to go to the capital, which she was very surprised about, sitting on the sofa in a red dress.